What is your background, by the way? Have we ever talked about that?
Not necessarily. I don't know. Maybe. Probably not. I usually don't talk about me very much.
Yeah, I was going to say, you always have a lot of dirt on other people we got to get to.
No, I studied communications. Music, theater, creative writing, and communications. Then let's see. Oh, did I ever tell you I stole a master's degree? Have I ever told you that story?
No.
Oh, I mean, it's a very short story. Rich kid with affluenza from a family that has money and businesses and is going to slot him into a spot, but he has to have some letters behind his name. That was never going to happen for him. So concocting a scheme with me, his drug dealer, and then, pot. Well, it's not.
Yeah, it was not.
I wasn't a full service pharmacy or anything. I was pot, little mushrooms, whatever. And some of the faculty at his school, he got the letters, I got the knowledge. I have the equivalent of a master's degree. He has a piece of paper. So that's my master's in communications. It was a very short version.
Detail that out for me. Did you sit in on these classes, or you kind of just...
I surveyed classes at several different colleges and hit up some seminars and various other programs. A lot of it was the early days of being able to do this sort of thing remote. So a lot of it was just written communications back and forth. Yeah.
So you acquired the knowledge.
Exactly.
He got the paper.
Yeah.
Huh.
So whatever. I work for myself. I've never really been in a job where the piece of paper mattered. So, yeah, whatever.
And do they ever even really check if you do have the piece of paper? If you just say, "Oh yeah, I've got such and such degree," is anybody actually going back to look at it?
Sometimes. I mean, especially if you're a public figure and a journalist is like, "Hey, about this thing, there's no transcripts for you anywhere."
See, that's good journalism, though. So you have to say, okay, am I betting that someone's actually going to do their due diligence, or can I squeak by on this?
Yeah, but I mean, I'm a planner. I'm a criminal and an Eagle Scout, so be prepared and cover your ankles. Like, he was enrolled in all the right places. It was his name on all the classes. For all some of the professors knew I was that kid, so which was fine.
Yeah, I bet that happened a lot, especially back in the day.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when I
slot yourself into a couple different classes.
Yeah, at the time I was making a whole side hustle doing other people's homework. It's basically been a way to describe what I've done since very early in school, was getting paid to do other people's homework. Not even now. Like when I'm doing compliance work, just doing your homework for you. Like I'm just going through the worksheet, checking all the boxes and looking up the answers to put it. It's an open note worksheet. You could have done the homework yourself probably, but it's long and it's tedious, and then you got to know which books to crack open. So good thing I listened during class time.
Well, that translates to kind of what you're doing now, especially in this political sphere where you're digging into people, you're dotting I's, crossing T's.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the other people besides journalists who will catch you on not having the degree you say you have. But for what it matters in a local race, it'll be a big deal. In a national race, who cares?
In terms of coverage for this local election, are there a lot of people looking into the judge's story?
There are now.
But prior to, say, this year, 2024, even 2023, were people aware of his behavior?
Oh, yes. There's John Schiff. John Schiff has been on this story since at least 2020. He's a court reporter, has a blog here in Humboldt County, and he has been very on top of this. So he has just a laundry list of articles that are Judge Kreis is a piece of shit like this. Judge Kreis is a piece of shit like this. I guess, and here's where we hit the episode entrance stinger. Ding. But yeah, this is a judge that is well known for this behavior. So the charges dropped, and that got a lot of attention to it. Otherwise, most Humboldt voters would never know. Right? Judges' races are boring. They're so boring. You almost never find a challenged judge, just because most judges are, fine. Excuse me. Ooh, gin burp. But also because the role of a judge, like continuity and experience on the bench, is useful. It's important. It's so having that, like as a voter, having the same judge for several terms, that's a good thing. Unless, right? So Judge Kreis has been well known for a while for this kind of behavior. And when I say this kind, I mean we can sit down and like piece out all the 19 charges dropped against him from the Commission for Judicial Performance. That's the adjudicating body within the state that holds judges accountable to what's called, I think it's the canons of ethics. And that is just like the written rules of like, thou shalt not. But it's, it is a much stricter code of behavior than exists for most other public servants. Most public servants don't even have a binding code of ethics, nothing that they're going to get like brought up on official charges by an agency and then potentially lose their job. Right? Sometimes they might have to write an apology letter. Like judges take this real seriously, and there's a lot of reasons why. Like if that link in the justice system is corrupted, that's a big deal, right? I mean, a shady DA, all right, fine. So different caseloads get charged one way or another. But if a judge is not as sober as a judge, right? If a judge is making even just erratic decisions, it sort of, undermines faith in the system. But if the judge is then making corrupt decisions based on personal relationships, which is a chunk of what's alleged in the filing document, in the indictment, that's, well.
You want to talk about undermining faith in the system?
Yeah. I mean, then justice is for sale. And is that where we live? Should it be? It is. Everybody at home, we all know justice is for sale. Should it be? And when we have the option to wipe out a market for justice, we should probably take it, right? When we see a place where, and it's not charged that he necessarily sold any votes or anything, but there are a laundry list of cases where he should have disqualified himself based on the standards and the canons of ethics and the relationships he had with the attorneys involved. Right. Aside from several friends, one of the attorneys in question represented him in the Shasta Lake case. Going back, because I don't think we talked about it on camera, the Shasta Lake case being, of course, where Judge Kalin got into some trouble over basically rowdy behavior at a lake party, which, if we're talking about a state assemblyman, okay, who cares, right? The allegations of anti-Semitism, okay, we could talk about that, but like vaping and getting a little drunk on a boat doesn't matter unless you're a judge. All right. Once again, the saying is sober as a judge for a reason. So that sort of thing wouldn't be necessarily damning outside of a judgeship, but that relationship list. Right. The lawyer there was a lawsuit that arose from the Shasta Lake incident. The lawyer who represented him was in his court for several other things. And he should have disqualified that. He should have put that onto another judge's docket. That was not done. So, I mean, we can go list by list, but so the general categories are non-sober behavior, sexually predatory behavior, I guess I'll put it in that category, and then just run-of-the-mill judge corruption, right? No, not the extraordinary type where he's like drug dealers are paying them money to get a heads up on a search warrant or anything. That would be, well, that wouldn't make the news. And I wouldn't tell you if I knew about it.
The judge, the aspect of just consuming drugs seems to be the least damning in all of that, because like you said, if it was anybody else,
Exactly.
you just say, oh, somebody was smoking weed on a boat. That's just every lake.
I've done that. If this was somebody who was representing me in a legislative body, yeah, fine. Makes you more relatable, right? I don't judge those kind of personal behaviors when it comes to making that voter criteria. But for a judge,
Whatever happened to that? Because we were talking outside. That's how Judge Kreis came on my radar back in the day, was because of that. And then he kind of fell off. I never really heard anything about that.
that case got settled quietly and then refiled recently against the county without him as a defendant. I think he settled out of it. I think he was hoping to get it far enough
Swept
out of the
up the
news for the election cycle.
And this was in 20...
I believe it happened in 2019 or 2020. Maybe the incident was 2019 and the lawsuit was 2020.
It was right around the start of COVID.
Yeah. Which is part of why we all had the time to pay attention to it, I guess.
Yeah, right? So he settled, and now they're bringing a case against the county
The
on
case
grounds
has
of...
been refiled, right? Because the case got dismissed, he settled, and then refiled without his name. It was basically kind of like a way to get him off of the case. So he was not the case against him was not dismissed. It was settled. The case against the entirety of the defendants was dismissed so that he could settle, and then it was refiled with other defendants. That was the last thing that happened, I think, this last week. But he didn't. He wasn't cleared, but he wasn't like found liable. He's settled, which is kind of an admission, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, and nobody's willing to cough up the terms of the settlement, whether there was an admission of guilt or anything. So we don't know.
Settling is always kind of dicey, because are you admitting guilt and you're trying to just cover it up, or do you not want the belief of guilt and you are innocent, and so you're saying, okay, let's just get rid of this because I'm not guilty, but I don't want this out in the public. I don't want people thinking I'm guilty. So,
And I've also worked with people who didn't feel liable, but did feel empathy. Like something happened that I probably could have stopped. I'm not liable in a legal way, but I do feel personally responsible for this, and so I'm going to stop this from getting ugly and just do something to help out somebody who got hurt.
almost buying off a guilty conscience.
In a way, yeah.
Do you think that's what happened in this case?
I mean, I'd hate to speak for anybody, but certainly not
Purely hypothetical speculation.
Right. But strategically, and from what I have gleaned in opposition research, that would not be in character. I think he just wanted his name out of it because there was an election coming up, right? He's been preparing for this for a while, and has some cagey consultants on board. So I really think it was a move to just get it done and out of the way, so that it wasn't in the news anymore.
So take me to the beginning of this for you. You got on board with Van Dyke's campaign.
Yes. So I, through the grapevine, she hears that I do political campaign stuff, and she launches her campaign and invites me on board. She has, so I got on board because of her. I got on board with her platform. Like I found out, and then I'm like, oh, and you're running against that guy? Oh, Jesus. So, but she's, generally a justice candidate, was running on integrity before all this blew up. She wants to push to get a mental health court, a dedicated mental health court in Humboldt County, which we need. We're one of the last counties that don't have one. And we are one of the most impacted counties per capita by mental health issues and costs. So should probably get that handled. And again, last time we talked, we talked a lot about addressing core issues of homelessness, and that is one, because we talked about homelessness is trauma, right? The act of becoming homeless without consent. Right. I was a weird case. I was like, fuck rent. This is all a scam. I'm out, and like found a community of nomads and discovered that you can just wander for years and years. But that's not how most people come to not have an address. And the process by which anybody comes to that, there's several different paths, but it's all trauma, right? It's either family trauma, it's medical trauma, it's financial trauma, combination of any of those. And then whether or not addiction played into it beforehand, it is one of the first things that is then used to self-medicate that trauma. So, right, different substances for different folks' outlook. So that combination, and then they get enrolled into the criminal system, which for someone in that position is just more fucking trauma. So making it, putting in a dedicated mental health court to specifically address people who are, say, outside of the range of functional society member for one reason or another, and get them help, get them some treatment, get them some healing, get them some way to get back to like interacting with people again.
Some base level stability.
Yeah.
What does a mental health court look like compared to a regular court? I'm not familiar with that.
Well, I'm not a lawyer. Basically, it interfaces with the system in a different way. It's more rather than incarceration, it's going into treatment programs. I think it is in some ways systematically analogous to what you see in a drug court. So when somebody comes in with drug problems, they are sentenced to rehabilitation, right? They're sentenced to a program, they're sentenced to a counselor, they're sentenced to check in and piss test and do all these things. And if they're treating their addiction, they are not sentenced with fines and jail time. And I think that's probably a similar case that we're talking about. If you're hitting your therapy appointments, if you can prove you're taking your meds and taking them responsibly, and you're not abusing your meds or whatever, and you made sure your grandson didn't take them and sell them again, whatever. Like all the different things to address like a person's responsibility to take care of themselves so that others don't have to, sort of, I think that's the analogy. Now, again, not a lawyer, never taken part in a mental health court, so I don't know. Knock on wood, could happen any minute. But yeah, it's focused on getting people treatment and help, right? Because jail doesn't help anybody. It doesn't make anybody more productive. It doesn't give anybody skills. It doesn't, in a few cases, and some incarceration systems, I'm sure there's exceptions, but the system as a whole that we've built is not one that functionally gets someone out of prison ready to reintegrate with their family and their friends and society and get a job and go do things, right? Partially because of barriers we put up after the fact, right?
Well, and partially because of how it's structured.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea of rehabilitation is almost a joke.
No. Yeah.
Where it's punishment, and it's a punishment that reinforces bad behavior.
Well, because it's crime school. It's it's university level criminal classwork.
Yeah, let's take all of these criminals and lump them together and see if maybe they can learn something from each other.
Yeah, and then that's the job that they're prepared to go out and get, right? I knew lots more criminal shit on the way out of jail than I ever knew on the way into it, right? Every time I go and I'm like some old head that's been in there in 20 years, like, here's what I used to do, and here's why it didn't work. I'm like, oh, that's real interesting. Might as well be in class.
Well, and then you have the aspect of what do you have to do when you're in there to survive? And how does that impact you?
Yeah. Well, and more specifically, that you are not in a social situation. You're not building social skills that will be usable in any other environment, right? You are building paranoia. You are building tribalism, right? You're not building a spirit of cooperation. And again, there's some prison programs that are like pioneering things, doing stuff great, and none of those are private systems, I'll tell you that much. But yeah, so having that be the end point for someone whose problem is that their mental health has gotten in the way of them following laws, right? That's just asking for a worse outcome. So let's not do that anymore. Let's have a mental health court. All right. So that was one of April's platform planks that drew me to her. There was also it's a phrase that's gotten captured by the culture war, but it used to mean something: restorative justice. What basically what it means is enrolling victims into the process of rehabilitation.
Victims or the perpetrators?
The victims of the crime are part of the process in restorative justice, right? They have agency and control in the situation. They're not watching lawyers and then hoping that something gets done and then inevitably being disappointed by the sentence because it turns out that that whatever mandatory minimum is 2.5 years, and that's not what you were hoping for. And even so, that then means that you are cultivating something vindictive within someone who has been traumatized by something, an invasion of privacy, an invasion of person, whatever the crime against them, right? That you are then making them cheer the pain of another human being, right? We are like, yay, vengeance. Did anybody learn that in preschool? I didn't learn that chant. Was it Sunday school we learned that? No, pretty sure forgiveness was in, right? There's no societal benefit to cultivating that relationship between someone who's been wronged and someone who wronged them, right? And in fact, usually when you find successful societal models, it is, I had to go fix the neighbor's window. And the neighbor was there telling me, and I got to see how cold her house was because I broke her window in the middle of the winter. And, it was an accident and whatever, but it was still, I had caused harm. And I was not, that was not a initial voluntary gesture. There was an authority figure that was like,
we're going to correct this.
Yes. Right. And, that had to do that. Also, I grew up Mormon, which there's no grace in Mormonism. You repent, you go and fix what you did. Right. Which is we could talk a lot about upsides and downsides of Mormonism, but I think that's a valuable ethic of like, oh, Jesus forgave me, so it's all good. Well, hold up. There's still an old lady in the house down the way that's cold. Like, maybe you should go fix that. Jesus didn't fix that yet. Maybe Jesus had something else in mind. Maybe there's some hands at play here that Jesus doesn't have. So putting that into play in the justice system, and also like having sentences be actually, I don't want to say poetic, but actually meaningful, right? If it's community service, it's community service in a way that actually addresses what they did. Or, if there's some racial related issue, a lot of times you'll find people going and working at community centers that are focused in the community that they attacked, right? Both to show them the actual humans that they are, that they have a caricature of, that they've been doing shit with, but also to then have their actual labor benefit the people that were harmed by their work. So that's restorative justice, and you hear it in the culture sphere a lot of times. It's like soft on crime, coddling criminals. That's not what it is. It's making the punishments meaningful for the community. Right. And it also, so all the studies also indicate that it gives the victims an enhanced sense of peace of mind, right? Because they've participated in it and had some agency in it and were involved in it and helped execute it. They're not just passive observers of justice being had on their behalf. They are both active participants and recipients of the justice process. It builds faith in the judicial system. It also heals the actual interpersonal wounds, right? And especially in a small fucking town, that's real important, right? Because our kids all have to go to school together. At the end of the day, like especially when you get outside Eureka and it gets even smaller and smaller community size, like it's important, right? It heals the breach in community that happens in criminal behavior, right? Because in small towns, it's almost never not personal, right? Right? It's just business. Yeah, in the city, it might be just business. In somewhere with a population of 1,050 square miles, that might be just business. That might be a complete stranger that's just a check in a book, and you're kind of a sociopath, and you're looking at it like a scorecard. But here, that's your fucking neighbor. That's the cousin of your girlfriend's brother, right? There's no way in which we're not enmeshed with each other somehow in a community this small. So bringing restorative justice in to mend those wounds when they happen, we're not quite at Hatfield and McCoy's with some of the old grudges around here, but man, there's some hatches that ain't buried. I'll tell you that. There's a lot of old wounds.
Is this like a tiered system for restorative justice? Because I'm thinking violent crime might fall into a different category than property crime or
I'm not
petty
aware.
theft. But no, under Van Dyke's platform, does she have any distinction for that?
Well, so when she talks about restorative justice, she's talking about like specific programs that are in place and getting funding for a specific set of facilitators and things like that to perform this very specific set of things. So it's not, there's not really a creative process to it. As far as I know, I don't know where and how violent crime sits in that, right? I know that it has been approached with restorative justice. I don't know what the state of those programs in California are. So I'm not sure the specifics of which programs and how they would apply to which crimes, but it's more an ethos that has programs attached to it that can be sort of built in, adopted into a court system.
Yeah, it's a challenging time, like you said, to use the term restorative justice because it means so many different things to so many different people, and especially looking at California more broadly.
Right. That was done to the phrase, by the way. That's called culture jamming. That's or more generally comms jamming. When there is something that is a threat to you, you call it something. You attach other things to it. Syncrety is the linguistosomatic phrase about it, and that is basically like, okay, take the word woke. Before anybody ever uttered it on Fox News, it meant a thing in the Black community, right? It was a phrase that was used to mean a very specific thing. That is not now how it is used, right? And so the very specific thing that it was used to communicate had power, right? It was a way to identify safe people, right? And now it's not, right? Because even people who buy into this mass commodified wokeness, with all the syncrety of ideas that attaches to it, are now not safe in that same definition of wokeness that was originally like, you can trust this person, right? This person understands. They're not a dick about it. They're helpful and they're like kind of generous. They get it. That is now somebody who calls themselves woke, not necessarily. Right. So you dilute the power of the term by adding junk to it. Right. So that's happened with restorative justice. Again, restorative justice is a very specific set of programs. Right. It is a codified legal theory. Right. Again, that's why I'm not a lawyer, so some of the things like, well, that gets into some stuff that I didn't study yet. So but it does have like very specific meaning. But because it is just like woke, it is a meaning that is only meaningful to a small subset of people who are communicating about it, in this case, progressive lawyers, that it is easy for people who oppose it to assign other things to it because people outside of that little category don't know. Right. So if the person performing this culture jamming is one of their trusted sources, is someone who they have learned to believe when they interpret these things for them, well, then you've lost layers of meaning. And then when that person repeats it, not understanding the truth, they will probably omit the truth entirely and just talk about the buzzwords, right? And then nobody reads below the headlines, and then we're all C students, and so that is how, through some intentional communications jamming, you can take a powerful concept and make it either toxic or useless. Right. It's an intentional communication strategy. It's something that is part of social engineering. It is done. It is what happens. But so this is another one.
Well, some of it is definitely the attribution of junk.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy if you're on the other side, you can take these terms and kind of co-opt them for your own definitions. But some of it also, I think, is the fringes of people in these groups broadening the category on their own and applying their own junk. It's junk coming from both sides, especially you talk about crime in California.
Certainly. Yeah, no,
rehabilitative justice might mean, people rob a Target, and instead of facing penalties for that, they're let out the same day. And that might not have been a fringe on the other side attributing junk to it. That was junk coming from well-meaning people, you could say.
Sure. I mean, again, it doesn't have to be with specific intent. I mean, again, who was it? Twain is generally attributed to never, never assign malice when incompetence will do, or never assume malice when incompetence will do. You don't necessarily have to mean to comms jam. You can completely ignorantly do it. You can believe in it and be like, this must be what it means because it's another thing that makes me feel good, and some of the words are spelled the same. And that's not how a lot of this works. Right? Because words mean things, and some of it is technical jargon from people who have studied some things for 20 years and need a very specific phrase to delineate it from the other thing that's just barely different, but that people will have duels with daggers over.
That's, I think, such a powerful concept that has been lost today, is that words mean things.
Words fucking mean things.
But they don't today. Words could change on a dime. Words might mean one thing to you, and then you go talk to someone else, and they have completely different definitions. We can't agree on the foundations of these words anymore.
You don't think that's accidental to you?
I don't know.
No.
There are a lot of dumb people out there, and they're just running buck wild through life.
But all people can be led, right? There are buttons to push. There are ways to manipulate. All people can be led. And social media echo chambers are lethal to truth, lethal to subjective agreement of facts across a wide base, right? There's no Walter Cronkite anymore that's giving everybody the same dose of news on the same range of topics.
I've used him as an example before, and that was even before my time. I've never seen anything by him, but he was that gold standard.
He was like the last universally trusted newsman, I think. I mean, some of the like babies in the 80s and 90s had a few.
But do you think he was fudging things around here and there, and he was just such a sole source that he could get away with it?
Cronkite specifically was not the sort that would roll over for propaganda, and that's part of what got him his reputation.
We don't have a lot of those people anymore.
No, be it corporate propaganda, be it government propaganda, be it foreign government propaganda, Tucker.
We're gonna have to talk about that.
Oh God, we'll have a whole show. At the end of the day, there are many vectors and flavors of propaganda that are assaulting any given person at one time in a current social and broadcast saturated media environment. And the level of media literacy and critical thinking that we have been taught is not up to the task.
How much of that today do you think is because of that it's being subtly or overtly influenced dialogue that is changing our definitions of these words and of these ideas?
90%.
90%?
Yeah.
Intentionally subverted?
Yes.
Damn.
Yeah.
With malice intent, or they think they're doing the right thing?
Russian troll farmers are the reason there was discontent in the Star Wars community, man. Like I
haven't heard about this.
It's full cultural assault. Yeah. Yeah. The problem with Rey wasn't because she was a lady. It's because the Russians needed to stir up discontent. And a lot of people are real easy to stir up, right? Right, with the right psychographics. I'm not a fully funded Russian super spy, and I can look at the psychographics and say I know how to make his hate button push. I know what to get him riled up about, and if he knows 1,000 people and 1,000 people give a fuck about what he says, well, then I've riled up 1,000 people. If that person has an audience of 100,000, great. If I can get Joe Rogan, if I can get Russell Brand, fucking fantastic. If I can get Tucker Carlson with an audience of millions to go and just step on his dick in front of me, bring on the Putin love.
Part of me feels like Russia is just this
It's not just Russia, but it's an easy example.
My fear more so than Russia or any foreign country is our own government.
First,
we're going to go in.
Our own government's not on top of it in that way. Our system.
You believe that?
Our system doesn't lend itself to a focused effort like that internally.
Yeah, but that's not true. I mean, just take COVID. It has now come out that, on top of the censorship of Twitter, of Facebook, of these other platforms.
That's not censorship.
It's the pernicious suppression of ideas that are counter to what the government wants. You had the Biden administration pressuring Amazon to remove books that went against their COVID narrative. That's crazy. That's crazy.
See, but again, words mean things. You say their COVID narrative. I say public health guidelines against pandemic.
But that have been proven to be false in a number of ways. And this isn't that masks were in any way effective, that the COVID vaccine was in any way effective, that there were not adverse side effects. They were, and this isn't just a private company, which people like to point out. This was the government leaning on private companies.
If we're going to talk about that, let's take Biden out of the equation because none of that fucking happened under Biden.
The Amazon thing did happen under Biden.
Okay, fine, but none of the initial stuff did.
The Twitter files stuff did. It happened under Trump too, a little bit. I will give you that.
But again, the Twitter files, like most of those are people actively spreading disinformation, not questioning the narrative.
What is disinformation? And should the government be able to decide what is? Because some of those people that were suppressed were saying that masks were not effective.
What's assault? Does the government get to decide that?
But that's different.
Is it?
If I punch you, there's a tangible result of that. My fist hitting you.
Verbal assault is a legal category.
True. But ideas, we want the government to police ideas. If I say masks aren't effective, the government should be able to pull that because they're...
If you have proof that masks aren't effective and are showing it, that's one thing. If you, without proof, are telling people to do something that the government says is dangerous because people are fucking dying at the rate of 1,000 a day, we're still at one out of 35 people is infected. Like,
but they had that proof.
Then you're.
But they had that proof and we're still censored.
I didn't see anybody with convincing proof then. I saw people with questions, and I saw people and the people like actually running experimentation and data, because that takes time to collect. I didn't see any conflict with them.
But that's not true. We've had the data on those masks that doctors use. We've had that data for years.
What, the 95?
No, not the 95s. Even the 95s came out to be ineffective.
Masks?
Surgical masks, which were the ones that were pushed. And there is a ton of evidence out there prior to COVID that due to the diameter of the COVID particles, there's no reason to think they would be effective. And people that were citing those previous instances of research were still being silenced by the government.
And again,
by our government.
So in a public health crisis specifically, like mandating measures like that, the best that they had solid data on, right? Because this isn't the flu. This wasn't a flare up of something we knew about. This was us making a lot of real educated guesses.
But right there, we can't even move forward off of that, because when Pfizer and these companies were doing tests, they never tested for transmission, and yet they were saying it was effective against spreading the vaccine.
And that was an aspect of Project Warp Speed. That was getting it in place ASAP.
Yeah, but
and that did save lives.
Again,
let's
be honest about it. People saying that it didn't stop transmission were again suppressed by our government. I get the Russia fear. I get China fear. Trust me. But our own government censoring people is a crazy step to take.
The people that I saw being actively like posts taken down and shit didn't have any numbers. They weren't. And I did follow people that were specifically like, hang on, let's look at these factors, and these factors. I never saw any, like, they got hate from a lot of vectors, right? But that is just the nature of the internet.
Okay,
these
but
days.
If we're saying
but as far as like the government cracking down, it was people that were telling people to go against publicly mandated safety measures,
and they were right.
So
what?
So?
But they were right. The government was wrong.
But they didn't know they were right. They didn't have the data to back up they were right. Going on a gut shot against the best science.
It wasn't a gut shot.
Going on a gut shot against the best science. Absolutely
How is it the best science when the research from these vaccine manufacturers are saying we didn't test for transmission?
Oh, I'm talking about masks. I'm talking about masks.
Talk about the whole thing.
Okay, but wait,
time out. So you're not.
So one, do not let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
I'm not saying
absolutely they were rushed. Absolutely, they could have been better. They don't protect against transmission against things like when stacked up to other vaccines that we have. But coronavirus is not like other
but it's not even effective
that are out there
against COVID. I mean, the efficacy.
I had COVID before and after, and I will tell you 100,000% there is a difference between vaccinated and unvaccinated COVID. I broke my ribs coughing like a tube of toothpaste before. I had 2 weeks of fatigue afterward. So let's be real clear. Like there are questions. There are things that could have been done better. There are absolutely not the vaccine was ineffective, and certainly not it's putting chips in you. That's my
favorite conspiracy. That's a great one. But okay, let's take for instance,
my sister-in-law and her husband were in a medical coma for 1.5 years because they remained unvaccinated.
Okay, let's take a step back.
So transmission or not,
was it because they were unvaccinated? Were they healthy? Were they taking vitamin D?
Really.
Did they take?
No, they were they were immunocompromised.
Okay, see, that's a different. That is a completely different category.
No,
of people.
Those are exactly the people that need that level of defense.
But if you were healthy and you got vaccinated, you might have severe side effects from that. Then nobody wants to talk. That we're just brushing. I
haven't seen any real evidence.
That's crazy to say that. You might not have seen it, but to to brush it off that it's not out there and doesn't exist is crazy to say.
But again, like, okay, so I have a range of trusted sources, especially in science and medicine journalism, right?
Is Fauci one of those?
Fauci is a bureaucrat. He has a job to do, right?
Wait, time out. I think we're getting lost on the plot. You're not worried about our government and any subversion, even looking at COVID, looking at past efforts. You don't think they're a big player in reinforcing ideas in the communities? I don't think that COVID is the big deal that people think it was as far as government conspiracy. Did you go through any of the Twitter files and that didn't raise any red flags?
At no point was anything ordered to happen. At no point was there like the government attempting to instate a penalty. So the government was asking a company to do something. If I own a theater and I will allow any old asshole on it, and one of those assholes says, "Hey, we should go to the hospital and unplug machines because I think electrical fields interfere with heart palpitations, and here's my data why." Everybody, let's go. And the mayor comes to me and says, "That asshole can't speak on your stage anymore." That is the conversation that is being had there.
No, the conversation being had is...
The mayor didn't...
That's not the conversation.
In this conversation...
That's not the conversation.
In this conversation, at no point...
Thomas,
in the analogy or in the Twitter files, did the mayor say, your shit is shut down and you're going to pay a fine?
Thomas, it is dissenting scientists saying we have the research proving the statements being put out are not true. And those scientists were being suppressed by the government.
Which ones?
Dr. Peter Malone? I mean, you had scientists who held patents on mRNA research that were being suppressed on these platforms saying, hey, this isn't what people think it is, and we need to have a discussion about that, and they were being suppressed. Then you had journalists who were looking into it being actively suppressed. It's not a private company. There were there were emails between the FBI, CIA, Trump's administration, Biden's administration actively asking to suppress certain accounts for what they were saying. And it's not fringe. It's not someone saying, hey, let's unplug these people from these medical devices.
But there is zero teeth to it. They were asking.
They were right.
They were asking.
They were right.
But they were asked, again, the government asked a company to take an action that was within the legal rights of that company to say yes or no.
Yeah, but it's not, the government it shouldn't be able to ask those things.
Yeah, it can. Government can ask you to do whatever you want.
The government can suppress your First Amendment right?
No, there is a limit to what they can threaten retaliation if you say no. Right? That is the First Amendment. The government can ask you to be polite in a public meeting.
Yeah, but the government asking Twitter to pull down people who are correct and citing valid research because they're afraid it's going to make people vaccine hesitant is a crazy precedent to set, especially when all of those people have since been vindicated.
I would have to look at some of the more
crazy,
to hear all of the people because there's plenty that weren't Naomi Wolf. There are plenty of these vaccine things, and I would say that in all likelihood, a lot of that caught up in broad spectrum, right? It was the whole of contradictory science because science takes time.
Okay, but
it doesn't get data. And it doesn't get debated on Twitter.
But ivermectin.
What about ivermectin?
Ivermectin won the Nobel Prize for its use in people. And it was branded by the administration, by the media, as some horse dewormer that people should not take. The Rolling Stone published an article that people were dying outside of a hospital with gunshot wounds because people had OD'd on ivermectin. Completely made it up, completely fabricated. There has been... ivermectin has been used on billions of people. Yeah,
but not as an antiviral.
That's what it is. That's literally
it's an antiparasitic.
Exactly. Okay.
It's an antiparasitic. But medically, that's not the same.
There is research out there
the things
that
viruses do are not the same
COVID.
Things that parasites do. Right?
But people have successfully been treated with ivermectin against COVID-19.
in a clinical environment?
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see that study.
You should look at it.
I haven't seen anything whose methodology I find viable.
Okay, what about vitamin D? Have you looked at the studies around vitamin D and how at one point it was like 90% of people that were hospitalized because of COVID were vitamin D deficient?
Interesting correlation.
People that were bringing that up were suppressed on these platforms by the government.
Okay. A correlation between vitamin D deficiency and the current pandemic is absolutely not enough data to say let's countermand what we believe to be effective public safety.
But they didn't
measures.
believe it to be. How can you come out and say this thing stops transmission? You get it, you won't spread COVID, when it had never been tested to stop transmission.
I'm not saying nobody in the government lied.
But those are the same people that are censoring dissenting opinions. People that are coming out
Again,
from the jump.
So you keep saying the word censor. Words mean things.
But what?
We covered
But it is
that.
censorship.
That is not censorship.
If
Nobody is in handcuffs. Nobody's in a cage. Nobody got fined. Nobody got shot. That's censorship.
That's not censorship.
Yeah, it is. That's
Censorship is me suppressing your
government
voice.
No, government on pains of punishment forbidding something to be done. Asking a company to pull a post down.
It's not just pull a post. It's block accounts. It's
Fine.
shadow ban accounts.
Fine. And
that's not censorship? Thomas, come on.
If the company refused and then there was recrimination, that is censorship. Okay?
Thomas, the idea that that's not censorship is crazy, man. That's crazy. That's a crazy stance to take.
Words fucking mean things. We covered that.
We do, which is why everyone should be allowed to use those words without fear of government overreach.
Without the threat of punishment, that is a request. That's not censorship. Right?
The government asking Twitter specifically to pull down accounts and remove accounts from their platform.
You think not having a
censorship.
stage available to say something is a punishment?
I think 90%.
If
I
it
think
was
100% of people would say
if
that
it
that's
was
a
a
punishment.
government-funded stage, yes.
It's worse that it's not a government-funded stage.
No, then it's a private citizen
but it's
deciding
not
what to do in response to a government
But it's
request
not a private
that doesn't
company.
have a lawsuit attached to it,
Thomas,
that doesn't
dude,
have a
that's
jail term attached to
crazy
it.
stance to take.
Censorship means something, right? In the days of like, oh God, I'm getting canceled. They're censoring me. They're not fucking censoring you, right? Nobody's putting you in a cage. Nobody's going to line you up on the wall with the rest of the dissidents.
Where does
and
the
put
First
you in a mass
Amendment
grave.
break on this then? in your
Government
view?
punishment. If the
So as long
government,
as you're not
if
being
the,
actively
if
punished.
the government is not forcing you out, if the government is not tackling you off the stage, putting you in handcuffs, or giving you a fine, or actively taking something with governmental resources to do something, right? Then we're not talking about censorship, right? We can talk about like
Thomas, that is a crazy
we can
stance
talk
to
about
take.
corporate censorship and other ways of suppressing ideas, but actual governmental censorship has a criteria to it that is not met by saying, "Hey, Twitter, we think that these posts are going to lead to safety issues." Right? Because of what we believe correctly or incorrectly. What we believe at this moment is that this is going to be an issue in safety, and we'd like you to shove it aside and get it off your stage. Right?
But it's taking that stance, not only taking into account the fact that most of these people were vindicated and what they said was 100% true, and aspects of the government lied to the people and still had them removed. Saying that is not censorship from a government is insane.
Whether or not they're correct has no bearing on whether it was censorship.
But then the government, what
right?
if the government
whether
was
they were right or
censoring-
wrong, or whether there were aspects that were correct or not, there is an action that you take that is censorship, and that was not taken.
That's the idea that it's not censorship. I can't grapple with that because it seems like such a blatant
If
example.
the government ran Twitter, it would be a different conversation.
That's like saying if a government shuts down a newspaper because they're printing things the government doesn't like, that's not censorship because there's no.
At no point was anybody going to shut down Twitter. At
But
no
you're
point was that
removing
threat made.
a person's
if a
ability to
government
speak.
says, "Hey, in your newspaper, you published someone yelling fire in a theater,"
You're using completely different circumstances.
I'm not.
That's like someone yelling fire in a theater and there is a fire and people working at the theater are trying to tell you there's no fire. And you're right, there's a fire. And then they still kick you out and say, no, there's no fire. That's what you're justifying.
No, we're outside. So we're outside the metaphor here. So yelling fire in a crowded theater with no fire.
But there was a fire. These people were correct. There was a fire.
But there was a fire. But the mistakes they were making were not a further hazard to public health. Right? Okay, so we took.
If it's a threat, time out.
People got to. So everybody got to wear a mask in public.
Time out.
Did that hurt anyone?
It doesn't matter if it hurt anyone. It matters if it was based in science, and it wasn't. And the sad part is,
it was based on the best science they had at the time.
The best science they had
that was accepted by the folks that were involved. And you
don't want to die on the mask hill because the science was settled before COVID. It was before COVID. They knew what these masks could stop, what size microns could pass through, and they knew the size of COVID, and they knew that it could get through prior to COVID.
When masking was initiated, we didn't know how big COVID was.
They knew, Thomas. Dude.
Yeah.
I
followed it too. I lived through the same pandemic.
I know.
I watched it happen too.
But
I was
justify the science of masks, even the World Health Organization has acknowledged that it was bullshit. So to still try to justify that is insane.
I'm not saying that yay masking. I'm saying that we took an extra public health measure that it turned out was
not based in science.
Was unnecessary. It is based.
It was not based in
masking
science.
Does help transmission of various various viruses.
Not airborne.
Funny enough, we crushed the flu that year. We didn't know enough about COVID to know whether it would work for that, but better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
If you decide to wear it, if the government is forcing you to do something that is not foundationally based in science at all, and they're forcing you to do it, that's pretty crazy.
Who got put in jail for not wearing a mask?
You couldn't go in certain places. You couldn't do certain things. Mm-hmm. Thomas, you're taking a crazy stance here, man.
No, I'm really not. Taking an extra level of precaution and when 1,500 to 3,000 people were dying per day? No,
that had no effect.
That's not great.
That had no effect. Taking an extra step, why don't we just wear underwear on our heads? Because that stops COVID.
If there had been a body of science of
there
underwear
was no
on
body.
headedness?
There was no body of science that said surgical masks stop. You know how absurd it was? They had mask mandates instituted. And you could go into a restaurant, you had to wear your mask, but once you sat down at your table in your protective bubble, COVID couldn't reach you and you could take off your mask. That's how absurd the masking was. And they knew that, and they still forced that on people. And this is the same government that is turning around and censoring, pulling people off these private platforms by nudging on them, which if the government comes to you and your Twitter and they say, hey, we're going to need you to do this, there's no fear of retaliation if you say no?
If so, first off, Twitter has the level of lawyers where it's not an issue. But yeah.
That's crazy. That's the idea that the federal government can't lean on a company to do what they want is insane.
Because both of them knew there was a line the feds could not cross, and that was censorship.
These people...
No,
the argument that
Twitter
these people
also
were not
knew,
censored is insane. It's insane.
Twitter also knew that there would be no legal ramifications for their decision one way or the other. Right? Because there is a line.
People are suing because of what went down.
They're suing Twitter for deciding to do what the government asked them to do.
Man,
Right?
that's such a crazy stance to take.
Words mean things, man. Like
Words
that's
mean- okay, let's take that out to its logical. Let's take that out to its logical.
That is the
conclusion.
nuance of free speech.
If words matter,
Mhm.
and the government is lying about words,
Hold up.
what does that mean?
I would say that most of the people making these statements were mistaken, misled, or optimistic.
Or
I don't think anybody was like
willfully negligent.
We'll get them to. I invested in these mask companies, and now we'll get them to wear everything.
Well, that is
Like-
100% counter to the whole ivermectin story.
Hmm.
Because in order to get the emergency use authorization, there can't be any other viable option
Mhm.
to the public.
Mhm.
So in that terms, yeah, there was 100% a nefarious angle of demonizing this horse dewormer, without a doubt.
We can have more conversation about that when you show me what you think you have evidence for that it's effective.
Okay, well, just take
Because everything I've seen is that all it does is fucking make you shit your guts out. Like it strips the lining out of your intestine. That's it. So, like, not functional at all against a virus in your lungs.
kind of like, well, if it wasn't functional at all, then it would be on par with the COVID vaccine, which was still forced on people.
Once again, the vaccine lowered the death rate. It did not do active harm.
You know what would have lowered
But
the death
shitting
rate?
out the lining of your intestines
You know what would have lowered
does
the death
active
rate?
harm.
If people exercised, if people took vitamin D.
Yeah.
That was not talked about at all. And people that were talking about it, again, were actively censored by the government.
I don't think anybody I didn't see anybody rationally say if you exercise you don't need to be vaccinated or public distance, right?
Well,
or take
did you know
take
that
social safety
they've
measures.
acknowledged, the NIH has acknowledged that 6-foot distancing was just something they pulled out of their ass, right?
It was the best they could do at the time.
You were being far too accepting of just their bullshit in some regard. If they say there's no science saying that separating 6 feet does anything, but we're going to force people to do that. Words matter.
Again,
Words matter. So
you
if you're
say
going to say
there's
this
no
is
science.
they've said that.
There was plenty of
There was no
research
science.
about distance in pandemics.
Thomas,
There-
dude, we
it
gotta.
exists. Again, Corona was something we didn't have any idea how it worked, what it looked like. All we had was our best guesses about what has worked in other pandemics.
What about the
we
science
didn't
that
have
we did know?
was a dedicated pandemic response team because that got dismantled in 2018.
What about what we did know? That the vaccine did not stop transmission, and the government is actively telling people, because words matter, that if you get this, you will stop the spread. Let's take it face value at that. They have the research. They know it doesn't do what they're telling people it does. They're disregarding that and telling people it does what it doesn't do.
Mhm.
Get this? It stops transmission. They have the research.
I'm not defending the lies. Like,
But
let
the
me
whole point
let
of
me be
this-
real clear. There's
the
no,
whole
there's,
point of this
there's no
argument-
part of lying about
You can't
anything.
say that words matter and then cope when they're lying about the words.
No, no,
Either
no.
words matter
Hold up.
or words don't matter.
Hold up. Whether or not it was effective for transmission was a topic of debate. Whether it should
It wasn't a debate.
Whether it should have been,
It wasn't a debate, though.
it was.
The
There were
companies
people
had-
offering evidence on both sides.
There was no
One
evidence
set of
that it stopped
One
transmission.
set of it was
There was no
not
evidence.
convincing.
Thomas, there was no evidence. The companies that manufactured these came out and said, we never tested for transmission. How is there any
That's
evidence
exactly-
that they did?
Which is why they lost that side of the debate.
You
But
cannot,
at the time,
Thomas, we can't have a good faith argument of you saying words matter,
Mhm.
except in X instance when they flat out lie.
no. Wait, at no point am I defending lies.
But that's exactly what you're doing. You're
No.
saying words matter, but
I'm
even though they
saying
lied,
that censorship
that's
means
what
a
they had.
specific thing. Words matter. There is a specific criteria for action that falls under government censorship. Let's not just throw that out there and pretend that it's not.
Then this was government censorship.
No.
I don't know how anybody makes a rational argument that it's not.
Nobody's in jail. Nobody got fined. Nobody got cuffed. Nobody got shot. There were no governmentally imposed circumstances and consequences.
Are you working for the government? What's going on? What's going on
That
here?
is what censorship is. That the government performs censorship.
I got to figure out, I've got that TV over there. And my idea has always been, that TV has always been that I'd be able to pull up stuff. And I haven't quite dialed this situation in yet. So I'm going to Google it right here.
That is specifically what our government is restricted from.
Is defined
doing.
as the suppression or prohibition of any parts of books, films, news, etc. that are considered obscene, politically unacceptable, or a threat to security.
Let's go to government censorship.
We're talking censorship.
Yeah.
Words matter. This is the case of censorship.
And again, we talked about like if Twitter had agreed that, and when Twitter agreed, that was corporate censorship. Right?
No, because the government is the idea that the government wouldn't lean on if the government comes to you and says, do this.
When we're talking about the law, again, I'm not a lawyer, but when we're talking about constitutional law, what the government is limited from doing is not asking you to take an action, is not giving its own opinion on a thing. It is limited from when you argue, having you punished.
If
that
the
is
government
the line.
Goes to the Washington Post and says, do not run this story, provides no further explanation, and just says, do not run this story. And the Washington Post doesn't because the government came to them and said that, regardless of how the Washington Post feels or what they may or may not be afraid of, and they don't run that story on behest of the government, is that censorship?
That is a choice made by the editorial group.
Why did they make that choice?
It could be a lot of things. If a billionaire comes and says, don't run the story, is that government censorship?
It's censorship.
Okay. See, again, the government is precluded from doing a certain range of things.
Censorship of American citizens. Based on factual
American
information that they are saying that is counter to a narrative being pushed by their own government.
The government is limited from punishing you for what you say. That's it.
I get. I mean, I don't understand your stance on this, but I do believe that you are not alone in your opinion, which kind of freaks me out a little bit.
A lot of it is because of what I see that being weaponized to. Again, we talk about syncrety. Yeah. See, that mindset is being used to syncretize other ideas into it. And you've already illustrated some.
What mindset are we talking about?
I mean, so general government distrust is an easy Venn diagram there. But then we get into, some level of conspiracies. We get into specific, talking about Fauci, right? That like getting into those specifics, like that is the syncrety that we're talking about, right? Because all of those other things get roped in that are either fallacious or specifically destructive, right? That jams the comms.
Are you making the argument that there's a negative aspect in this situation of being distrustful of what the government has been proven to have lied about during COVID?
I'm saying always take what the government says with a grain of salt, right? But when we're talking about public health, right? We're not talking about public policy. We are talking about an emergency response to public health, right? To a public health disaster, right? We're talking about the same thing that happens when a tornado hits a city, when a levee breaks and a city floods. We're talking about immediate disaster actions. Granted, this one lasted way too long, and so we were in disaster conditions for too long. But at the point where you have to make a call to save lives on the best information you have, and at the point where like at a certain level, especially in the lead up to the vaccine, we all knew everything the government said was saying was bullshit.
you had people, you had Kamala Harris, you had Biden say that they would never take a shot that was designed by Trump. They would never take a vaccine. Who's going to trust that vaccine?
Mhm.
Then they come out when they're in the administration pushing this vaccine, and you had people that said the exact same thing they said a few months prior being removed from these platforms, questioning the vaccine.
Specifically because, let's be real clear, it saved lives. Right?
I'm not gonna bite on that.
They
because
lied to people
to save lives
in order to
that's
save lives.
Justification?
We can have a whole debate on how honest you need to be to make somebody make a good choice.
But lying for lying's sake.
If it was just for lying's sake, if I thought anybody that made the drug companies, but they always do. But if I thought that anybody in the government made any extra money off that, we'd be having a different conversation. Fauci has a broad range of biochemical and medical investments. I didn't see anything in his investment reporting that showed that he was like, aha, I'm going to take advantage of this.
Oh man.
There's whole websites that'll show you
can empathize with where you're coming from
when government employees make trades.
I think you need to re-glance over the Twitter files, because that's my biggest hang-up, to say that what was uncovered through investigative journalist reporting.
Let's also
not
be
call
real
that
clear
censorship.
That the Twitter files was a cherry-picked, basically PR stunt by Musk.
To disregard it as that just because it helped someone, even though it was all factual, is insane. Thomas, you can have a variety of different reasons for doing something. True. And maybe Musk put this out because he saw it and realized, oh, this is going to help me and help Twitter. It doesn't discredit the damning evidence that was uncovered in that reporting.
I didn't find it that damning.
That's crazy.
No. If the government asks you to do something, you have a choice to make as a citizen, as a business owner, as someone else.
Even
if the
take
government
that stance. Okay, time out. Take that stance.
Then you have a different set of choices.
Take that stance. Even considering a lot of it was a lie, you still think that they were right in their actions to do what they did.
I don't think they were over the line.
That's where we disagree. I think government overreach in any form, especially in the form where it's based on bullshit,
that's not
is
overreach.
Insane.
To ask the reason that it happened is inflammatory, and we could talk about that. But the actual action of saying, hey, you have a platform, there is something inflammatory on it, we would like it not to be there. That is 100% within the government's right.
I disagree. I think that we are in an interesting time.
Force that to happen, that is different.
But they did force a lot.
And if you don't,
they did force a lot.
And if you don't, we will subpoena you. If you don't, we will cut your licenses. If you don't, there will be criminal charges. If that was the case, and I have seen not a fucking whiff of that, then we'd be having a different conversation. But we're not.
Does Hamilton 68 mean anything to you? You got to look back through the Twitter files, man, because to say that is not damning evidence of not just government censorship but government overreach blows my mind.
Asking a giant corporation, who else? If the government believes that there is a threat to public safety,
but then they can do anything. If the government believes that there's going to be an imminent terrorist attack, why can't they lock everyone down for the next 6 months?
Yeah,
if the government believes that there's going to be
we can talk a lot about the Patriot.
Wait. No, let's carry this out. If the government believes there's going to be another disease, why can't they force everyone to get the next vaccine? Without any question, you're going to get this vaccine if you want to leave your house.
They can already quarantine you if
which is insane.
And this happened before COVID.
Tom,
right? This happened during Ebola.
We're going to go around in circles on this, but my thing with all of this is I am terrified that we are in a point in time where people are willing to trust the government by any means necessary, that they're willing to ignore blatant examples of bullshit and stomach it because they have this belief that the government only is working in their best interest.
And on the other hand, I, an anarchist, know that the government has a net benefit effect in many circumstances, and that to recognize the absolute shit of it is not to discount that we have a fire department.
But seeing you as an anarchist, that's what really blows my mind, is that you're coping for the government on this with the mask, with the vaccine.
No, I'm recognizing that they towed right up to the line where we have a social contract that they don't.
They took the line, they shit on it, and they flushed it down the toilet.
They did. In the specific case we're talking about, the Twitter files, they towed right up to the line.
Let's talk about COVID.
They said
COVID more broadly.
Okay.
They blew past any line that would have been there subsequently. They did.
Not even that.
Vaccine passports.
Yeah.
Six foot distancing, forced masking.
That's all.
That's not the line.
None of that was new. All of that has been settled, right? Well, this is not our first pandemic in history.
Forcing people to get vaccinated to go out to places, that was a precedent that had not been set before. Nowhere near this scale. You could point to schools, which, there's okay.
Yeah, I was just going to during polio.
Still opt into that.
Uh-huh.
This was to go to restaurants. This was to go to movie theaters. This was to go outside.
Hold up.
They shut down outside, Thomas.
They gave recommendations.
They shut down outside.
Private businesses.
They shut down public parks. They shut down beaches. They locked people up for going to the beach.
For the first 3 months when we knew nothing.
Thomas.
That was absolutely the case.
My guy.
Hold up. Like, if the house is on fire and we don't know what's on fire, but we know this room isn't, let's all stay in this room.
Do you know anything about the Patriot Act?
Yeah. We have deep issues there.
But does that just face value, the Patriot Act, knowing what you know, does that bother you, what they did and what they got away with?
100%.
And there's no correlation in your mind with that and COVID, with the idea that you can push the edge during times of internal strife to get what you want.
What permanent policy came out of COVID?
That's not even the right question. The right question is,
if we're going to compare it to the Patriot Act, it is.
If you
because
push the
Patriot
line,
Act
they've
has
now
become
set the precedent.
Permanent policy. COVID public health emergency actions have all been sunsetted.
Thomas, they if nothing else, they set the precedent, which is just as dangerous.
No, they didn't. The precedent was set in 1918.
There was no.
This was not.
You know
the
what's interesting? 1918, masks didn't do shit back then either, and most people didn't die because of whatever the Spanish flu that was going around. They died from a bacterial infection that was probably caused by them wearing masks. I went out on a limb with that. There's something there.
I was going to say, let's see case file on that one.
They didn't die from the Spanish flu. A majority of people didn't die from the Spanish flu. It was from these other measures.
You know, there was a war going on at the time.
Yeah, right? Not that. I'm not talking about that.
No, because that was the transmission vector for the Spanish. They'd almost shut down the whole war because every time they moved troops, they lost troops.
I need to get somebody in here again to run. Here we go. National Institute of Health. This is going to be right up your alley.
Okay.
The majority of deaths during the influenza pandemic of 1918 and 1919 were not caused by the influenza virus acting alone. Report researchers from the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, part of the National Institutes of Health, instead, that's phrase weird. Instead, most victims succumbed to bacterial pneumonia following influenza virus infection. The pneumonia was caused when bacteria that normally inhabit the nose and throat invaded the lungs along a pathway created when the virus destroyed the cells that line the bacterial tubes and lungs. There's something about masks in there too, but
So the virus wiped out your. Oh, sorry, I'm off the mic. The virus wiped out your sinus barriers to your lungs and then got to your lungs. That's what I'm hearing, right? That's what it says, just to translate. Right? The internal barriers of your body got eaten away by the virus, and then bacteria was able to go from your nose straight to your lungs.
There was something about masks that I read.
I'm sure somebody said
trying to
something
find
about
that.
masks because it was a hot topic.
But you could say the same thing about COVID. Did most people die because of COVID, or did they die because they were overweight, unhealthy, and had comorbidities?
Shit tons of people died just from COVID.
I disagree.
However,
I disagree with that.
Comorbidities absolutely raised, like,
I disagree with that.
Put you above
I
like
disagree
the
with
threshold.
that 100%. I think that if you were a healthy individual and you got COVID, your chances of dying statistically were less than 1%.
I have 4 dead friends that disagree with you.
Any of them have comorbidities?
No.
Any of them overweight,
Not these
unhealthy?
ones. Not
They were
these ones.
all physically in shape,
Younger
didn't
than me,
drink, were great.
fit as tanks.
Did any of them get vaccinated?
3 out of 4.
Oh, that's an interesting correlation, isn't it? Get vaccinated, completely healthy, and then you die.
No.
Okay.
It's just, it is just part of having disease. I will say that the ones that got vaccinated had been infected earlier as well.
Which they
Right?
recommend
So
you
guess,
don't do.
So I guess if we're talking about a comorbidity, there we are. Right. Previous exposure to the same disease.
We can, and the vaccine.
Right, not in one case. Every
Dude, I don't know, man.
every anecdotally, again, the plural of anecdote is not data, but anecdotally, every super severe case I've seen, including my own, was without vaccination.
I've seen a lot of people get jacked up from getting vaccinated.
I haven't. I outside of
so
like,
here's the thing.
outside of like the weekend.
Here's the moral of the story. We're clearly operating on different information here in this conversation. To tie things up with a bow, the government coming in and acting on one side of the information that we're getting, when clearly, at least for us, it's not settled, that feels dangerous.
It is. Okay, so that the government has the capacity to interact with our lives on that level, okay, I can see why there's concern. If they're doing it not to save lives, like...
To save lives is bullshit, though. That's such a bullshit argument.
Is it?
Yeah, because I could say that I'm going to lock you in your house and never let you go outside to save your life. Because if you go outside, maybe you'll get skin cancer. And maybe you'll bump into somebody and they might shoot you, Thomas.
Sure.
So I'm going to lock you in your house to protect you.
So maybe we talk about the threshold of risk there, because
all risk
for a
risk is acceptable if it's the individual deciding what they're okay with.
Okay.
Not the government.
Except at the point where you become a weapon against other people. Oh, did we hit the end of a video card? No. Episode 2.
That's our cue. The cameras are done with our bullshit. I've been having an issue with, I don't know if it's the software on these cameras or I'm running HDMI cables into my computer. And I had a guest that brought up the idea that maybe it's the sag on these cables that are interrupting the connection to the camera and causing it to kind of crap out. I'm always tweaking something here, man.
Yeah, I got to say that's outside my wheelhouse.
I know.
Like when we're talking cable to hardware, structural integrity.
We made it pretty far. I haven't had issues for a while, but okay. Changing topics. Maybe
all right.
That's a sign.
So we had a fascinating.
I didn't anticipate us going COVID.
Hey,
that's what I love about this. You never know where it's going to go.
It goes wherever it goes. Right. It's not what I came here to talk about.
But that's one of the beauties of doing this is you never know where the conversation is going to lead.
Right. Well, and I try not to be like I'm not a politician, so I don't always pivot back to message.
Well, I think that's a good thing.
I know.
Being able to go off on a tangent and carry the conversation. I've had politicians in here and just people
being autistic. That's
a good thing.
That's just autism.
Well,
man.
that's one of the sad things.
You want to pull my string on one of my hyper focus topics? Oh yeah, let's do this.
Well, you talk to some people, and not to, attack anybody, but you talk to some people and you almost feel like you're getting a political speech that's been honed, refined, regurgitated a million different times, and you're not actually getting to the real person.
Sometimes it's because they have had to tell the truth to so many people that it becomes rehearsed.
Or not even the truth, but just their line.
Yeah.
Just whatever their research has come up with. Oh, you got to do this, say it this way so that it comes across to the people better.
Right. Or just whatever the way they found. If we're talking about like local grassroots candidates, more likely it's just the way that felt natural to them. And somebody was like, say it like that every time because that was good. And then after the 30th time, they're like, and therefore it no longer sounds natural. That's just part of like the risks of public speaking and trying to keep things popping. And like, I don't know if you've ever done like stand-up comedy or anything or theater or anything where you're doing the same routine over and over and over again. It's real rough to keep it sounding natural.
I've done theater, and that aspect of, okay, you got to keep it fresh.
Yeah.
Is definitely.
Yeah. But like high school, college theater, what'd you do? Like
high school theater,
like three or five performances, maybe 10 if it was a big high school.
Well, I did an acting class for a while in college that we read lines a lot more and had to perform and try to keep it fresh throughout the whole scene.
But performing like the same thing every day for an entire theater season, man, it doesn't matter if it's Shakespeare. Eventually you're just going to sound like you're you're just like, to be or not to be, that's the question.
Well, and it's not
unless you have fantastic talent.
Well, and it's not artistic. If you're a political opponent or running a political campaign, people are already kind of skeptical. Like, what are you trying to sell me right now? What do you want?
As well they should be. And I tell oh Jesus, I'm ripping through your gin and I make no apology.
Polish it. That's what that whole stock is over there for.
Do you have any other gin drinkers on your podcast? I'm always curious.
I think you and I are the only ones that touch the gin.
All right, because the reason I decided that gin was my drink, I think I might have mentioned this last podcast, is that you get to the party with a bottle of whiskey. That's everybody's whiskey. You get 2 fingers if you're lucky, but you come with gin. That is your fucking gin all night. And if you find somebody else drinking your gin, you have found a soulmate. You're like, gin drinker?
Yeah, whiskey's a big one. Everybody goes for whiskey. Yeah. I think I've had
tequila,
some vodka
same story. Vodka, same story. Like if you bring a bottle of Grey Goose, that's everybody's Grey Goose. You bring a bottle of Sapphire, you and maybe 1 or 2 other people are like, I see you have taste and refinement.
I went to a party one time with my sister and some friends, and I brought a bottle of whiskey with me, and I was just drinking it straight, and I was like the black sheep of the party. What are you doing? You're just drinking whiskey? You don't have any mixer? It's just whiskey? What are you, a 45-year-old man? What's happening here? And then they door-dashed pickle juice because picklebacks. Have you ever had that?
Yeah. Okay. I'm not generally a whiskey drinker, but
whiskey's my go-to. Yeah. Whiskey, I've tried to switch to vodka.
That's just my brown liquor gets me in trouble.
The hangover's a little harder than tequila or vodka.
That tends to be more sugary.
I was big on rum for a while. And that bites you the second day.
I liked rum for a long time, but rum is my wife's kryptonite, so it's not in the lineup. So speaking of getting drunk, Judge's race. See, you are a politician. You brought it back. No, I'm not a politician, but I do occasionally tell people tell them how to do that.
I want to ask here before we dive back into that.
Yeah.
So you came on to Van Dyke's campaign for kind of Oppo research, or was that your
general management? Media relations. Helping write
campaign experience.
Yeah, helping write press releases. Work in the back end, like the different software tools it takes to run a campaign. There's a program called PDI, which is very useful and thoroughly opaque. Like has no instruction or how-to documentation, so you basically just have to like push all the buttons enough times, but there's no intro version, so you have to pay for it or work for an organization that has it. It's a mess, but and they're the only, as far as I know, still the only data company that's allowed to just hand out voter information, right? Because they have a lot of things they have to dance through. When you work with like a campaign tool like Nation Builder, you have to manually input the voter information. They can't just automatically autofill it for you like they can in other states. But so that's the kind of thing, like general advice, working the tools, helping with press releases, strategy stuff, just generally like helping them run a campaign. And when I jumped into it, what I thought I was getting into was a plucky, energetic, progressive candidate, like someone with a lot of empathy toward the community, that was probably going to lose. That was because Judge races go incumbent. So she was stepping up as a challenger, kind of to make a point, to make a stand for integrity in the court, and also for name recognition, because often, like, it's your second or third election where you finally have enough people that know your name to get something moving on it.
And so this was prior to the investigation.
Yes. Okay. Well, okay, not prior to the investigation was ongoing, but I was not privy to that information. The CJP doesn't check with me. So I sign on the campaign. We start making moves, buttons, getting voter stuff and canvassing planning, and the back end that goes into any other campaign. And then the Commission on Judicial Performance comes out with 19 charges, 19 counts in an indictment for ethics charges against Judge Kreis, the opponent for April Van Dyke. And, well, that was not what I thought was going to happen. Right? Because, again, we talked about a little at the top that these things were known, and these things were like socially circulated around the courthouse. In my opposition research, it was not that hard to find. And if you read John Show's blog, he details everything about it. But it was not a matter of general voter awareness, right? Until, boom, 19 counts, and I have them right here. If you want, we can run through some of them. But I kind of talked about like the categories they fall under. But it's most, like, numerically, it's mostly corruption. It's mostly good old boy cronyism. Yay, good old boys every fucking time.
That's a recurring theme of us doing this.
Yeah, how about that? It is kind of like locally what I want to see phased out of local government is that good old boys cronyism. Is people not keeping their friends accountable, right? In my world of friendship, I am the friend that will tell you if your ass is fat in those jeans. If you have Coke in the boogers in your nose, I'm the guy that's going to tell you to get to the bathroom and clean the fuck up. That is not how the Good Old Boys Network thinks. They're like, oh, hey, everybody's got Coke in their nose, right? No, right? Like trying to just spread vapid amounts of bullshit instead of holding their friends accountable to a standard that actually is worthy of the public service that they're dedicated into. So, and here we are again with kind of that same thing, because this is a history, right? The investigation I think started about 4 years ago, with Rory Kalin's lawsuit, which, if you haven't seen the new one, the one that was refiled, includes like a 35-page diatribe from Kreis's ex-wife. Scathing. Like, I have some exes that don't like me, but none of them would swear to that shit in court. So I just, like, the level of explosion that has happened in the last couple of weeks, not what I expected when I signed on to the campaign. And I will also be honest, like, I respect that April has not decided to go after this, right? I mean, to like super point out, like, look at this asshole, right? She has taken some statements to like use it to highlight her own integrity. Like, hey, guess who's never had any shit like this go down? Hey, guess when I saw shit like this go down in my old office in San Joaquin, I sued the fuck out of them. Like, I don't let this shit happen. But she hasn't been like, what an asshole. Which is why I'm not a candidate, because that's exactly what I would. But So that was the campaign on Sign On For. That is the campaign that I'm now involved in. Since then, though, there's been even another wrinkle, and that is the writing candidate. So Jessica Watson, whose name you might remember from the Josiah Lawson case.
I did not know she was involved in that.
She was one of the 2 prosecutors that botched that, along with Roger Rees, a super right-wing, hyper anti-Semitic, just chef's kiss of an asshole, who I think is partially behind her campaign and also is attached to Paul Gallegos, who is an ardent Kreis supporter.
Christ?
Kreis. Judge Kreis. Judge
Oh.
Yeah.
I thought we were going religious for a second. Judge Kreis.
No. All of these people, I'm sure, profess an alliance with Christ. But, though their lips draw near me, their hearts are far from me. So Jessica Watson popped in as well as a writing candidate after the charges dropped. So her impetus, her stated public statement is that because the person I was gonna vote for, it has been embroiled in all this. But the thing is, she's in those documents. She's in the documents as somebody who had to call him out for not disqualifying himself. She has actively called this judge out for taking actions that are in the corruption category of the ethics of canon. And that was going to be her vote. I'm going to vote for that guy. So those are the candidates in the campaign, and it has been a fascinating run. I mean, if people haven't seen the Rolling Stone article or the Guardian article or the AP News article or the Jewish News Network article or the Indian Breaking News Network article or right, just a raft. I mean, and that's just stuff that's not in California. SACB, Press Democrat, all of them have gone and looked into this. His response, of course, is that it's all my jilted ex-wife and a disgruntled ex-employee. And to be fair, some of those come from that Shasta Lake party that come from that jilted employee. And some of those, after having read his wife's manifesto in the court case, did come up from his wife. Specifically, the one I'm thinking is when he waved his penis in front of a sleeping woman.
Yeah, I read that.
It was his wife that walked in on him, and in her document, she says she doesn't know how far it would have gone if she hadn't interrupted and scolded him. Like, judgely behavior, man.
Then to turn around and say, "Oh, it's all just partisan hackery."
Yeah.
That are coming up with these attacks.
Yeah.
You're going out on a limb with that one.
Let's talk for a second about his partisan hackery bullshit. So he comes out with a big old my word about like, oh, the Dems didn't endorse me. What a bunch of partisan hacks. I decided to run as no party preference and got rid of my registration, and it's why they don't endorse me. And then extols the like bipartisanship and nonpartisanship of judgehood. Well, it wasn't very much longer before he picked up an endorsement. Want to guess from who? Team Red. It was the Republicans.
Yeah.
Because who do you go to when you've got some sexual and personal misconduct scandal?
I don't know if you want to dip your foot into that one.
I'm just saying they are the specialists, right? Matt Gaetz, right? Because the Dems don't do it well. Fuck, they kicked Franken out, right? If you're in that situation, Team Red's who you want on your side.
Well, Menendez is what? Is he a Democrat?
Menendez.
Yeah, that senator that was getting really comfy with some gold bars from...
Oh yeah, Democrat. Also,
Democrat?
And again, faced calls from his own party to get the fuck out. That's the difference you see largely in Democrats and Republicans is Democrats are fractured in that way. Republicans since 1980 were trained by Grover Norquist to never talk shit about Republicans. Doesn't matter what they did, you don't say shit.
Well, they did oust Santos. got to give him some credit for that. But that was an egregious example of a guy just swinging from the hips.
I don't think that should be the threshold for misbehavior.
Yeah, lying about
before you're finally
everything.
I can't back that.
Were you surprised hearing that
I was
nobody
surprised
looked
that
into
they
that
did
guy?
anything. No, I wasn't surprised that an absolute comment got through the primary system and through all that.
But I would think Oppo research from the other side, you would come across something that you could find some thread that you'd start pulling and realize, oh, this guy's completely full of shit.
Oppo research is expensive.
You've done Oppo research. What does that look like? What's that process? Are you just digging into somebody's past through social media nowadays?
In the cyber age, the company that provides India's cyber intelligence services is for hire. For like, if the account's small enough, like $3,000 to $5,000. Real cheap. This is everything they have digitally. And then, I mean, Oppo research is also an amount of social engineering and human engineering. I mean, in the same way that, so another fun job that I've had a long time ago was security penetration testing. Pen testing.
You were a pen tester.
I have been known to test a pen. Not on the like hacking end of it. I always had technical support on that, but I was the guy with the clipboard and the USB stick that somebody else programmed. Like, hey, how's it going? I'm just here to check your your technobabble hoojama. I just need to get into this room and this room. You're just going to give me the key? No, thanks. I'll drop it back by the desk. I'll be 10 minutes tops. That guy. So all of those techniques are also viable in opposition, Oppo research. Also, you check the court records, you look into people that have issues with them and willing to talk. And sometimes you quietly approach the candidate or the target themselves, right? You hang out with them in the bar and get them drinking.
Yeah,
just hang out,
love
see what
to
they
talk.
say. Don't they though?
Yeah.
I'm such a good listener. That's really a lot of Oppo research, especially in when you're approaching principals or like people in their circle. You just be a good listener.
That's what I love. Are you familiar with Project Veritas? Probably the big one. That's what I love about them. And shout out to Sound Investigations. I had Arden Young on who did a Pornhub expose.
Huh.
And that's what they do. You meet with a higher up. Maybe you go out, grab some lunch, just get them talking, maybe have a little wine, and loose lips will tell you anything.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Great Wall of China was never breached. It was bribed. Like the weakness in any security system is the human element. Anything you want to keep secret, two people can keep a secret if one of them is dead, that kind of thing. Like eventually it all comes out. And the other thing is, I mean, so it's not necessarily like relevant in this circumstance and this cycle, but we talked a little bit about last time. It's not the fuck up, it's the cover up, right? Once someone realizes that they are exposed and that there is something that they have done wrong and that people could find out, the lengths they will go to stop people from finding out are often more egregious than the actual fuck up.
And that's where they get caught.
Yeah. And okay, so I guess you do see just a touch of it in this judge's election. We talked just a little bit off camera before we talked, and like I had to say, like I feel a little bit for Judge Kreis being in this position, like because anybody else but a judge could say to the voters, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I had some problems. Here are the steps I've taken as a human being to address them within myself. Here are the reparations I've attempted to make. Here's how I've grown as a person. And I hope you can still find it in yourself to elect a flawed person to represent you to the legislature, which would, like fine. But in this position, then he goes to a CJP hearing and they're like, we understand that you have publicly admitted to all of these charges and you're out. Because that's the level we're at. The CJP will issue a severe public admonishment and censure, which is just shy of getting kicked out of your job for being habitually snippy on the bench. I looked at some of the others that you've been rude. And if you don't shape up, we're gonna kick you out. This is way past that. There's a couple of you've been rudes in there of you were erratic, you were combative with this lawyer, this, that, and the other. But that's the lowest tier of fuck up in there. After that, it's sexual misconduct, judicial corruption, not disqualifying yourself is a big fucking deal. It sounds oh, I just shouldn't hear cases for my buddy. But no, you shouldn't hear cases for your buddy. Human beings don't have that capacity for non-bias. We just don't. We're hardwired. We are hormonally charged to afford trust and forgiveness to people with whom we have a bond. We're social goddamn apes. That's just how it works. And in order to defend against that in the judicial system, because we noticed that over thousands of years of people hearing and mediating conflicts, they're we should not do that. And so we don't. And there's a reason. There's 24 times where he did.
All of this being said, these are just preliminary investigation findings, correct?
No.
These
are charges. The investigation is done. This is an indictment by the CJP. He is now invited to defend himself against these charges, which he did by denying everything and blaming it on his wife and the public defender who sued him, which many of these complaints are not involved with those two cases. So, deflect, deny, distract. That is the playbook when you're busted and you might be able to run the clock out. Deflect, deny,
especially
distract.
as a judge, and you're this close to election. What are you going to do? I didn't do any of it.
I mean, if he was going to live up to the title of honorable, I would say back out.
Do you think he has a shot at winning, though? Are most people aware of the charges of what's going on?
2 weeks ago, I'd have said maybe. Now, I mean, it is unavoidable in the news. So this also ties in with mail-in ballots, though, because the news dropped the day after ballots. Most people would have been seeing this news in the first week of having received their ballots, depending on when it got there in the mail, which day it hit, but or which day they got the news. So there will be a chunk of people who voted without that news, without knowing. But once it broke, it has been in the news cycle 2 or 3 times a week. Somewhere. If you're a responsible citizen and before you vote, you do just the bare minimum and Google the race, there's no chance that anybody who is voting today doesn't know what's going on. If they're not just voting on. So some of them might be voting on the oh, well, it's just allegations and
he hasn't been convicted yet.
Right, he hasn't been convicted yet. Which I get, but I will also throw out there that, okay, so CJP gets between 1,200 and 1,300 complaints every year, right? People complain about judges. That makes sense. They investigate about 10% of that. They get about 100 to 150 investigations per year of things that this allegation might actually be a violation. they bring charges on less than 1%, less than 0.1%. They bring charges on between 1 and 3 a year. Like most years, there's one winner of the CJP fuck you lottery. And this year, it's our guy. Like sometimes they'll get 2 in a year, but they almost never bring these formal charges. 'Cause when they run the investigations, oftentimes they'll just be able to approach the judge and like, so can you just privately handle this? Like, can this just be taken care of? And most of the resolutions of cases for the CJP is just a private correction. Right. So somebody had a quiet conversation with the judge as part of this investigation. The judge was like, oh, I can see the argument there. Okay, I'll try to be a better judge. And had that sort of interaction like, oh, this tiny infraction was just barely on the edge of what I shouldn't do. I will pull back from that behavior to make sure I'm well within. And that's the sort of thing that gets handled privately. But if you fight them, well, here we are. And also if there's something just egregious, but I haven't yet found a case, and I certainly haven't thoroughly checked out their whole category, but I haven't found 19 charges in a charging document before, or 19 counts in a charging document before. Usually when they investigate a case, it's like, you have this one habit that surfaced 3 times. You have this one little, you were snippy, and you were intemperate and judgmental against the code of ethics in these 3 cases. And that's enough for a severe censure. These are 19 wide-ranging counts. This isn't even like the same behavior in every count. So, yeah. It's very tough to think that anybody voting today isn't going to find that out, right?
So the question is, how many people voted prior to the information dropping?
The turnout was real big this year so far, according to the elections office. Like,
I do see a lot of signs for Kreis out in lawns.
Less than you saw a couple of weeks ago, though. One thing that specifically some spotters for the campaign are sign watchers and reported like, oh, I noticed this place, and this place being there's not a Kreis sign there anymore. But you do also find them. I mean, the people that support Bone and Hansel, right? Because they are part of his big endorsers. Those are where you find those signs.
Still supportive? Are those 2 supportive of him currently?
I can't imagine they'd
be hard to attach yourself to it now.
It would be hard to, after the charges dropped, have decided to endorse Kreis unless you're the Humboldt Republican Party. Right? That's the part that baffles me. Like, after the charges dropped, you're like, that's our guy. Whoa. But how do you make that choice? Just strategically, politically. What is it that goes through your mind? Was like, after these charges have dropped, we should definitely jump in.
Yeah, I don't know what instills confidence in that decision.
I don't know. And it's blind support of the old boys club, right? It is a philosophical decision, not a strategic decision, right? They are invested in a certain group of people who also include and endorse this person, and so they push for that slate.
You just slot in this person into that box.
And to be fair, I mean, they have such a niche amount of influence. I get that they try to amplify with whatever they can. Like, if this is our boy, we'll push him. But doesn't look great to an independent voter.
Well, what about Watson? I mean, the decision to be a write-in candidate is...
Yeah. If part of her rhetoric hadn't been specifically like, I would have voted for Kreis, even though I'm named as someone who called out his corruption.
Yeah, that's pretty damning too.
That's the thing. Like, is that Is that the temperament I want on the bench?
Because then what? You knew about the behavior and you were willing to put up with it?
Exactly. Which is the whole fucking problem. That's the entire fucking thing that I personally want to burn out of local politics, is knowing what the problem is and being like, meh, whatever.
What are you going to do?
What are you going to do? What am I going to do? Maybe I'll just support the guy and maybe I'll get some largesse out of it. Maybe sometime down the road I'll get some trickle down. And the sort of lawyer who knows that giving your vocal support during his election and being his buddy is going to get you something out of it. Right? I don't know. I don't think Watson is that type because she wasn't on his endorsement list specifically. But there's a bunch that still are. It makes you wonder.
What is Van Dyke's background?
Almost entirely indigent defense. Public defender and conflict counsel.
But not here locally?
Here locally.
Oh, okay.
Public defender, conflict counsel specifically, which is if there is some sort of conflict of interest with the public defender's office, then conflict counsel steps in to be the one who does not have a conflict. But the conflict counsel is almost entirely indigent defense. It's a public defender's position. So you're coming to people who are like, if you can afford a lawyer, no, all right, next up, this public defender, and specifically with people who are somehow in conflict with public defender's office, which often means that they've been through the system a few times and they've already had one or two of the public defender's lawyers and either have like a good relationship or a bad relationship with them, and either way it's a conflicting relationship. So that's primarily what she's done. Right. So it's in some of her public statements, she specifically calls out like wanting to work specifically with people who can't afford it, which it's right up my alley, right? That's exactly who I think should get public positions, because wanting to help the people who help them, not as good, right? I'm always more interested in somebody who can, you always hear like judge somebody by how they treat the waiter, right? That kind of thing. Same deal. Like how do you treat someone who can do nothing for you, who has no power over you, whose influence can never help or hinder you, who is in, if we're looking at the societal hierarchy, like so far beneath you as to be negligible. How do you treat that person? Right? That is a mark of character to me. And for somebody to then dedicate their lives to people who are in that category, I find that admirable. What
happens if Judge Kreis wins as this indictment comes down?
He gets bounced in a couple of months and then Newsom appoints somebody.
That's what happens? Newsom gets to appoint a judge?
That's how he got in the first place. He's an appointee.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, if there's an opening available in between elections, the governor makes an appointment until the next election.
When was he appointed?
2017.
Which is around the time most of these.
Some of them were from even before. Like one of the charges is he was the hookup for a couple of his lawyer buddies for cocaine out on the Hill, and that was while he was a lawyer. So. Incidentally, if he gets bounced off of judgeship, the kindest thing you and I could do is not vote for the guy, because then he's off the hook with the CJP and he only has to answer to the Bar Association. I'll tell you, the ethics requirements for the California Bar Association for lawyers, way lower than the CJP. They're much less picky about how you act in and out of public than say the CJP.
Well, that draws into question, if you're him, why not just gracefully pow out of the race and take your chances with the bar?
Status, power, money.
Would you be willing to risk it though?
The smaller the stakes, the more vicious the action. right? If we're talking about petty fiefdoms, if we're talking about small areas of near absolute power, to lose that, especially if you've invested your ego into it, just fucking devastating, right? Especially, and now I'm going to talk generally. I don't know Judge Kreis well enough to say that these traits apply to him. But if you're in any way narcissistic, if you're in any way chauvinist, or have any form of superiority complex, whether that be racial or gender or even just personal status, wealth, if there's something that you think you deserve and are entitled to some amount of prestige, wealth, and status, it's real hard to let go. It's brain damage. We talked about this. Like, money and status causes brain damage.
Oh, that's a tale as old as time, right? You start to lose your connection with reality.
And now there's actual studies on it now. That we have begun to develop science to explore how privilege damages your brain. It actually like weakens some mechanisms in your ability to process thought. And it's fascinating. So if we're talking about why would you try to hold on to this position, there we are. Like, why wouldn't you want to have more status, right? Why would a person like that want to take a pay cut?
Well, if you've
right?
got the keys to the castle, maybe you just roll the dice,
right?
See, and hope for the best.
Yeah, maybe Richard Salzman can pull you out of it. Oh, Richard Salzman. So, are you familiar with Salzman? Have you heard the name? So, another political, someone else in town that does what I do. Although he does it much more in town than I do. I try not to shit where I eat. But, so Richard Salzman is generally right-leaning consultant. You find him working a lot for the old boys. Just generally strategy stuff, how to run a campaign, which tools to use, and how to push the buttons on them. Kind of the same stuff I do for other people. But he's working for Kreis. And he is famous locally for being the reason that a lot of people learned what an IP address was when he was faking letters to the editor to do basically mass astroturfing into local media for his candidates and got busted for it. So that's the caliber of folks that he's working with. Don't remember how I got into Salzman, but he's a fascinating character all on his own.
I'm gonna have to do some digging into that guy.
You won't find shit.
Well, you would think that you're in this field, you would at least understand your IP address and how things could be tied back to you.
This was in like early aughts.
Okay.
Yeah, this was
a little less understood.
Yeah, he was very much on the cutting edge of political skullduggery. Right? This was before people knew sock puppet. What's a sock puppet? Well, before there was a word for it, Salzman was doing it. Points for innovation. Like, I won't lie, I've pulled some digital bullshit. So it's...
Well, that thing you said about you can hire out India's team out there, that I didn't know that. I mean, it obviously makes sense if you've got the skills and you're willing to sell them. But even you wouldn't even have to go that far in some regards because people are willing to put everything out online. Yeah, I'm constantly baffled by the willingness to just dump your entire life to the internet. And I don't know if people are just unaware that anybody can access that, or it's one of those things where you don't pay attention to it until it actually happens to you, and then you're like, oh shit, maybe I shouldn't post every aspect of my life.
I can only guess at what makes someone do that, because I definitely don't.
Are you pretty reserved in that sense, that you are very careful about what you put out there about yourself?
I have a very curated digital footprint. Anything you can find on me online, it exists because I want you to know that. I don't let people know anything about me. I have So once upon a time, I managed to stay actually anonymous, right? I don't think without a level of resources and willingness to cross certain moral lines, I don't think that anybody can be anonymous on that level anymore of just actually like, I could be anybody, right? Whatever you think I might be that thing. You can't check.
Moral lines in terms of
who you're willing to deal with to erase or change identities. Right? What sort of feasible behavior today? You're willing to condone?
Do you think the idea that you could actually erase your digital footprint?
Yes.
For the everyday person? Or yes. We're talking really?
Yeah. Yeah, you absolutely can. It's very expensive.
If this podcast ever goes offline, I'm in the wait.
Right. But also also fake identities. Right.
That seems more
actual
feasible.
Falsified identity. It's not actually like that. That's harder than not existing right now. Existing as someone that you're not.
But what if you already have a footprint online? You could still.
Yeah. Yeah. It's expensive and you're going to go to a German court probably, but you can do it. Right. It's 100% feasible with enough money.
So it's cost prohibitive.
It is cost prohibitive. Yeah, no, it's not something in America that a common person could do, right? A couple of places in Europe have what do they call it? Not right to invisibility, but basically you have the right to call for anything that is of you on the internet to be taken down. Like that needs like that is an invasion of my own personal privacy outside of like public figures and things like that. America has no such rules. Now, I mean, gone and gone are two different things.
Yeah, whose radar are you still on?
100% whose ever radar you hired to scrub, you're still on theirs. And there's some archiving and things that like a dedicated investigator could walk down rabbit holes to really try and find old stuff that has been scrubbed. But certainly for a public or even corporate level of analysis, yeah, that's just a matter of money.
That's a fascinating thought. Yeah, I was pretty guarded with what I put out there prior to doing the podcast, and I just kind of fucked myself.
Yeah, well, it depends on what you're trying to hide and from who, right? Or what you're trying to show and to whom, right? Because when you start a podcast, all of a sudden you have a personality figure a character that you want to show to the world, which is, depending on the podcaster, more or less true to your actual human experience, but guaranteed it's not 100%, right? Because there's shit you don't show on a podcast. There's shit you don't show in public. That's just being a human. But the level of that when it comes down to like actually hiding or not, the most difficult thing now to do is create a digital footprint that is not attached to you. And I'm not just talking about social media points. We're talking about like metadata, right? We're talking about the information about the information, right? Because, you know, I as a citizen am completely incapable of getting your medical records outside of skullduggery, outside of like going to a hospital and plugging in a USB and doing some bullshit. But I can absolutely buy your phone records, your calendar records, various metadata about you, and then discover that like, oh, you had a doctor's appointment at this clinic at this time. Your geopositioning data puts you at this place. You spent this much money on the cab to get there and back. And then the cab brought you to a pharmacy where you searched for on your mobile device side effects of HIV antiretrovirals. Well, now I know you have HIV and I never had to touch your doctor. Right? It's right, that metadata, that like things that are connected to the data that are available, right? Not just to the government, but also to private citizens. Because the trick the government did is that I don't think Orwell had foreseen in 1984 was like, oh, we're going to outsource the panopticon. We're going to have corporations gather all of this shit for us, and we're just going to ask them for it. Right? So we're going to make a request for this data because we don't need a court order. We just have to ask. Sometimes we even pay for it like any other customer, and then don't need a warrant for that.
Yeah, we're back to the whole asking situation. Do you think with a program like witness protection, how hard do you think it is realistically to find somebody who's in that realm?
Maybe let's not talk about it in terms of witness protection, but just someone in general who is attempting to hide via traditional or even state-sponsored methods. There is a level of security that you're able to take. And if you have state-sponsored methods, an amount of legitimate
leeway.
Well, even like legitimate looking deflection, right? Because they can give you a real license and a real, the state-sponsored actors can do things that your normal criminal or corporate sponsored actor can't do. Just as far as resources that they can bring to the table to actually be legitimate, because what we're talking about is being legitimate within a government framework, right? Generally, if you're talking about trying to find or hide somebody. So assuming a witness protection or some other state-sponsored program, there's a reasonable level of protection if the subject follows instructions. And again, we're back to the Great Wall of China, right? The wall is impenetrable.
The people.
The guy at the door is always going to be the problem. And so anytime you have somebody go out and, contact outside elements that aren't part of their mandated protocol, anytime you have someone involved that is not trustworthy or is vulnerable in some way, there's ways. There's ways, if you have the means and the time and the dedication, there's ways to find most people, which is why I stopped trying to be invisible.
Well,
right? Once I realized this, I'm like, I just don't have the resources.
Well, then you have, inventions like Pegasus, where how protected are you really? If a dedicated actor is out there looking for you specifically,
and see, that's the protection that most people have, is they're not that important.
Yeah, who's looking for me?
Right. The level of resources that it takes to utilize that much to find somebody, like, how important are you really? Like, in my years as a smuggler, I used to talk about talk to this with various folks in the pot game. It's like, I'm so paranoid, I can't smoke in public. I'm like, bro, nobody gives a fuck about you. The cops out here, they are not looking for you.
Yeah, maintain perspective. Small fish here.
Right? You are not that important. you need to take a step back. Like, delusions of grandeur aside, like, there's no government task force. Nobody's paying a single fucking dollar to pick you up. If you get caught accidentally, they'll spend money to keep you. Maybe.
I wonder if you would be better protected having a state sponsor like that, or if you would be
1,000%.
Yeah, but don't you think you'd be limited in some regards because they're playing within the box? Whereas if you go to an outside source, you might have more leeway.
Which box? Because are they playing within the box? Right? At the point where governments can take actions that are not under oversight by citizen bodies or not actively like FOIA-able. We can't. It's all going to be blackout redacted. What rules are they playing by?
It's a good question.
And though, right? When we can FOIA them, we can say, oh, these are your rules, and these are where I see. Oh, you crossed it over here. Fuck you. Go to court. That kind of thing. But in places where it's just like, and then we hide them. Well, how? Not your business. Well, how much does that cost? Not your business. Where do you have? Not your business. That kind of thing. What other rules?
There was an illegal immigrant that they caught somewhere, I think, in the interior, and he had quite a few different, I don't know if it was passports or just driver's licenses. I want to say something like 17.
Gotta admire the hustle.
Yeah, if you're going to that extreme, right?
Right.
Do you think is it harder to forge documents today?
Yes. 1,000%. I mean, just the level of printing technology that you have to get around, right? There's that. Yeah. And because of that, the level of resources and technology that you have gets up. And because of that, the people with that level of resource and willingness to take that risk, you get more and more into syndicalized crime, right? There's not a whole lot of private identity operators that can do more than get you like a license and a card. They certainly can't get you any kind of paper history or like.
But even with a license, once they run that, how protected are you?
What's attached to your license right now is a whole record of things, right?
No, but I mean, if you got a fake one.
Yeah.
So yeah, you might be able to get one that looks realistic, but can they scan it and get something that is a passable story?
Assuming it's worth what it is, they can scan it and it would just come up as absolutely nothing, right? Which will cover a cop at a traffic stop, but it's not going to cover the detective in the interrogation room because they're going to look further down. Right.
Now we're going back to the metadata aspect.
Yeah. Oh, we checked your financials and you don't have it.
Yeah, you don't exist.
Right. You have a driver's license and a beard. Can we talk about who the fuck you actually are? Like, yeah, that's that level of ability to fabricate has more or less evaporated in the digital age without resources. And the people that have those resources, if they were the kind that I still wanted to deal with, I would still be invisible.
So having dealt with them at one point, did you ever reach a bridge where you thought, I can go left or I can go right here?
Definitely did. It was not long after the Patriot Act when I saw like, oh, this is what I'm going to have to do to stay anonymous and invisible. I know who I'm going to have to deal with to get those things. And I know what that's going to cost me in my pocketbook and in my soul. And I'm out.
Was it a tough choice though?
No.
Or it was just
not when I finally laid it out. Right. It was tough to get the information and to get the data and like this is what I'm going to have to do to maintain my lifestyle. But after I had that, I was like, oh, well, then I'm done here. Right. I guess I'm out. Time to retire. Let the young bucks do it.
What were you doing in that regard?
I mean, in what regard?
Well, obviously coming to
that much gin, but
yeah, I was gonna say, where are we going with this?
I'll tell you anything the statute of limitations is worn out on.
How much of a necessity was it for you in your previous line of work to maintain that sense of anonymity?
I built my business around it. I ran essentially an MLM, a multi-level marketing network, right? Except it was smuggling and it was for illicit substances. It was for contraband. I called it the National Organization of Marijuana Acquisition and Distribution. That is NOMAD. And that is it was built on anonymity. I had a different name in every town. I was a different person in every place. I have theater training. I have different costumes, whatever. Like there's a lot of people who know me that don't know me. And like, there's a lot of tricks you can play. Like usually I wear glasses. I've got my contacts on because it looks good on camera. But who the fuck is this guy? Right? If I put glasses on, I'm gone. I'm just every other white dude. Right? You put on 5 pounds, you lose 10 pounds, you put on a big coat, you put on some tight. It's real easy to change people's perceptions of you, especially when it's only for 10, 15 minutes at a time in a poorly lit room over some drugs. But so that was how I built the network that I built back in the days when I built it before I retired and turned into what I do now. But at the same time, I was also doing political stuff then, activism and things, and that as well, like anonymity served me, right? I've always enjoyed being underestimated. I don't like having a reputation for anything. I want people to know nothing. I don't want them to have any inkling of what I'm going to do or how, right? Because if they do, if they're on my side, they're gonna try and co-opt or counter it. If they're against me, they're gonna try and co-opt or counter it. I don't have a whole lot of trust in other human beings. So yeah, that was basically it. I mean, every different town, every different city, sometimes different neighborhoods, different blocks of different cities, different identity, different person. This was all in a time when you could do that, right? And by identity, I'm just talking nicknames. So I'm not even talking like a license or anything, right? But in the world of social media, why don't you have a Facebook? Why don't you have a MySpace back in the? Why don't you have a Friendster? Yeah,
go way back to the archive.
Right. Well, I know. Where's your GeoCities page? Right, you had to be like 9 at that point when there's GeoCities, but yeah, some things you can fake, some things you can't, but. These days, it's much more difficult. Well, it's basically impossible to do what I was doing in the way that I was doing it with the morals that I have.
What scale are we talking about with this?
I don't know.
Theoretically.
I don't know.
I mean, I'd
hate to speculate.
Are we crossing imaginary lines here?
That would be amazing. Who could imagine such a thing?
I knew a guy who, a story from allegedly back in the day, would utilize services like the post office. And I mean, that's the rub, right? Is that the post office is the biggest drug distributor in the U.S.
Right. Because they're a federal agency and there's limits on what they can do to check your shit. Whereas you do FedEx, they're a private company and they can do whatever they want because they don't have a First Amendment for corporations. The post office, there's all kinds of like trucking there's whole trucking companies that are just fronts for transportation. Rental cars were great. I would often pick up a junker that would just make the trip to my next smuggling destination with a trunk full of whatever I was carrying. I just throw them the keys because $500 tip?
Yeah, who cares?
Gives a fuck. The methods and ways are all there, but the post office is popular. But you get down to you get $2,000. You can buy a rickety ass little submarine, right? There's all sorts of trouble you can get up to underwater.
How did you get started in that? Is it just location?
I actively decided a couple of things. One, that the society that I existed within was not worthy of my participation. 2, that the criminalization and punishment of cannabis specifically, but generally other, especially natural drug offenses, was unjust and must be opposed, right? What's the saying? It is the responsibility of a moral man to oppose immoral law, something like that. But seeing something wrong, being young and thinking, I'm gonna fucking fix it. Because you're 20, you don't know that shit doesn't work like that. And so I basically just dropped out of society. I was always too clever for my own good. I was the kind of kid that got heavily recruited by military intelligence, or I just wanted to play the band in the Marines. They really wanted me in military intelligence in several different bands. So I didn't end up going into the military for that reason.
They wanted you in the sense that they were actively trying to recruit you?
Oh, yeah. Worked real hard. I made it really clear that if I signed up for a couple of different arms, made it real clear that if I signed up for them, that I was going to be put immediately into a military intelligence position, like somewhere in their training line, doing analysis, that kind of thing. Like, yeah, it was real clear.
Are we talking prior to the MLM track that you went down, or this?
Yes. This was in high school. This is like when you're being recruited for the military, but because it's cool for them to approach children, minors. This was back then. I just wanted to be in the band. I was gonna play great music on the steps of the Capitol, but no. And my eyes were too shit to fly a plane, which is the other thing I wanted to do, but no. And I was too big. The Air Force was like, you are 3 times the size of any of our fucking air jockeys. You are not getting in a plane. F-16s are not meant to carry somebody your size. Later on in college, I competed against the Air Force Academy in some places. I'm like, oh, you weren't kidding. These people are all like this tall and this wide. Guess they built the cockpit small, but so yeah, they wouldn't let me do anything I wanted to in the military. They were going to make me go and read numbers in a dark back room and never talk about it. Fuck that noise.
What was their reasoning for wanting you to fit that role? Were you doing any?
I fit a profile.
What decade are we talking about here?
90s.
And I would assume that there was some computer work on your end, or.
Partly because I was very literate in computer work. Partly it was because of my mentality.
How does that get on their radar?
Personality profiles, personality testing is part of the military testing. Like it's.
Oh, so you had taken a test to join?
Oh yeah. I did.
Okay.
I did all the recruiting tests and things. No, they didn't. Come
I
to
thought
me.
this was active recruiting on their end, where they single you out for.
No. I mean, the local military recruiter is definitely on the watch for like straight A students and things. But no, they weren't coming to me by name. It's like once I took the test, I got a lot of phone calls from people like, "Hey, can we come over and talk to you about?" But yeah, once you test a certain way, they are interested in pulling you in for certain things, and I guess academically and scholastically because of whatever caseload or class load and
you fit the profile
dispositions, yeah.
And so you decide you're willing to check out of society, to kind of buck against the system.
Yeah, fuck that noise.
And this is high school, after high school, and college.
So then I go to college, and I go to my first round undergraduate college, and realize that academia is not structured for people like me. And so I get 4 majors and I'm out. After that, I went to massage therapy school.
Okay. Just wanted to try a different lifestyle.
It was I like helping people, and it was something that I was always good at anyway. So part of it was a little accidental. Like I just kind of like went in and ended up talking to a recruiter, and she was so charismatic. I walked out. I'm like, am I in massage school now? Did that just happen? What am I? am I going to pay for this? What am I going to do? So get through that. And at that point, I am armed with the ability to survive wherever my hands are attached to me. On top of, I don't know if you know this, but a lot of holistic therapists really into cannabis.
Yeah, who would have thought that?
So I got a lot of connections through there and through college and various other things that I was doing when I was in college. College was when I got my first taste of political consulting. I worked for an organization called the Wyoming Group, which fucking bastards. Don't ever hang out with anybody that's from the Wyoming Group. But it's they do a lot of work for the Cheneys. They do a lot of like hard right-wing shit. And it, because it's in Wyoming and that is just what exists there. But like, I remember, when I sort of swore off of them was when I was doing opposition research at the time, and I was asked to look into somebody, and I found out that he had a bunch of financial discrepancies, but somebody else on the team had found out that he was gay, and so but there's all this, there's all these actual things. Like, no, fuck that. Nobody's going to vote for a fag. They told me we run with this all day, every day. He's had an encounter with a man. And at that point, as a queer young man myself, I was like, I don't feel good here. Like this feels bad. Like that's what we're going to use to turn people's perceptions, not this actual fucking problem, like the thing that should actually disqualify someone from public office, we're going to absolutely ignore because we can make more capital off of cultivating hate. So that was part of why I dipped out of that in the first place, and it's part of why it's still using these skills, having learned them where I've learned them and in the ways that I learned them. It's why it's still distasteful to me. But yeah, so then from there, college, out of college, and then tune in and drop out. 10 years later, I retired to Humboldt.
So tune in, drop out, that was kind of a backlash against working with the Wyoming Group.
Oh no, that was very much society in general. Just what I did and still generally consider the general like false facade of society and feeding into corporate and landlord capitalism. That idea was like, I can survive 1,000 other ways. I'm an Eagle Scout with too much IQ and enough chutzpah to go through and do whatever I can do. I'm big enough. I'm strong enough. I can survive most of what gets thrown at me. I'm just going to dip out and do my own thing. Right. I could have gotten a lot of different jobs. I decided not to.
And so where does the logistics empire start to kind of take hold?
Right about then.
Are you still in Wyoming at this time? Or you're back here?
I didn't get here until later. I discovered this as part of the logistic empire, right? I discovered Humboldt through
Makes
weed,
sense.
right? So yeah, that was about then. I'm like, well, what am I going to do instead? I'm like, oh, well, I have some connections, going to do some things, and I know a lot of people in a lot of different places that smoke weed, so I'm just going to get them weed. And then eventually I started running like an MLM. Oh, you like weed? Have you ever thought of being a dealer? You like this stuff. Do you have 5 friends that also pick it up once a week? Like that kind of thing. Like, well, how much more can you buy? How much more? And eventually, it starts rolling from ounces into pounds into racks into whatever. And then you retire and go blind. So you blow all your money keeping your vision.
That would be the way to do it, though. You don't want to be the guy that's on the ground that's front facing for everybody.
Oh, you sure don't. You want to be the secret guy that nobody talks about.
Did you know that going into it, that was going to be your role?
Mm-hmm.
You had planned for that.
Yeah. I made it that way. Like my number was a state fucking secret. I was different names to different people at different times. Like the entire idea was that I was going to be someone that barely existed, that facilitated a whole range of behaviors.
How did you work up the cultivation back end for that? Obviously, it seems like you have the demand. How are you getting the supply?
Mostly it was just investing in various farmers, indoor grows, and just having people that already had the supply.
Investing in the sense that you're starting it up?
The statute of limitations has definitely run out on the part
I think
where I say that I also had a friend in a police evidence locker.
Helpful.
Very helpful. Because why would you just destroy it? You light it on fire at the police station. Somebody's going to light it on fire in the park. I think it's all destroyed, right?
It's all ash at the end of the day.
Right. And if the cop has a little heroin problem that I can help him feed and hide, and then I get a kickback off of it that I can spread across the states, whatever. Life is good. He's dead now, so whatever. From the heroin.
Yeah, heroin's a tough one.
I say heroin. I mean opiates. It was pills. Like he got to oxy the normal way through the sack.
Well, that was the time period.
It really was. Yeah. So, I feel for him now. At the time, I was like, yeah, fuck this cop. He's all fucking chunky. But now I look back and I'm like, oh, that dude was a victim of the Sackler family. Like I have enough perspective looking back that like, well, thanks, Sacklers. I guess I reaped a little benefit off of that. Ooh. Right. Which is the kind of thing that you can make some distance on once you're retired, right? It's part of the reason you retire out of that shit.
In terms of quantity, if we were to speculate at its heyday.
Well, I don't have to speculate because I was the one keeping the quantities.
So what are we talking?
Between a lot and an awful lot. I mean, depending on the season and the time, and the product, because there was a couple of different things that I was morally okay with moving around. We're on a whole different show than the Judge Kreis thing, by the way. This is episode 3. I never less than doubled my money, and I tried not to move for less than 25 G's. All right, if I wasn't going to make 25 grand a profit on it, somebody else can handle it. Right? I only personally moved for big things, but there were 11 states in the network. 150-ish operatives, and God, we moved an awful lot of pot. I mean, routinely 100 a week, 100 pounds a week. Sometimes more.
Through
Sometimes
various
less.
means.
Yeah.
Did you have a favorite? Was trucking it more reliable, or buying a burner car that you could then dump, or it just depended on where you were going at the time?
Reliability and predictability are the same thing, and you can't be predictable. So rental cars, trucking companies, U-Hauls, every week it was something different. I'm a D&D player, so sometimes I'd actually roll fucking dice. I'm like, oh,
what
am I
today?
doing this week? I have a table of 12 distribution methods. Boom. Postal Service wins. So I couldn't even predict it. And so I knew that it couldn't be predicted, right?
Which is the name of the game.
Right. Once people can be a step ahead of you in that game, then they have you, right? If they're still following you, then fine. Let them follow, right? As long as they don't catch you. But if they get a step ahead of you because they knew where you were going to go, you're burnt. Right? That's how you get busted.
So in terms of those 150 employees, how many were you directly attached to?
dedicated business owners, I think you mean.
I mean, if it's an MLM,
all of them were initially introduced to me, and I helped recruit them. Right. So if we're going to use MLM terminology, you have your principal and your downlines, right? You have the people who you immediately supply, and then their downlines who they immediately supply. And I would happily hang out 3 or 4 downlines from me to be the guy that showed up at the party that looked like money and clearly was like the guy, and I would pull out a fist with a joint between each knuckle and be like, who likes cannabis? Who likes pot? Because cannabis wasn't the word then. And just be like that guy at the party, and then be like, if you ever want any more of this, there's your dude. He has the number that gets to my number. You will never know my number. And that's cool. And you rinse, wash, repeat.
Was there any fear about when you get diluted down to that level that it could be tracked back to you? Because that's one of the beauties of MLM, right? Is you can structure the architecture where there's only a handful of people that have direct access to you.
Mm-hmm. And each of them knew a different person. Right now we're back to multiple identities and different, like there were maybe 3 or 4 people at the height of it who knew me by the same moniker, by the same false identity, right? And that identity I then passed on to one of them when I retired, right? Somewhere out there is still a nomad. They're still doing the thing. In all states, in states that are not enlightened, that in the half of America that hasn't yet figured their shit out, there's a nomad wandering around, lighting up parties and helping cancer patients and getting green things where they need to be. So which was also always the point of the organization. Part of what really lit me up was a cancer patient, by the way, like someone whose life had been extended by cannabis, and then got me really into the science. Because before I was just like, this is bullshit, government overreach. They can't tell me what to put in my body. Blah blah blah. And then like I ran into somebody who was helping. I was like, oh fuck, this used to be medicine. This used to be on all the lists of medicine. There's all sorts of shit that make people better, but it's not there because it doesn't make people money in the same way that big pharmaceuticals do. So that was my initial youthful rage, sparked about it, but it wasn't what kept it going. It was what kept it going when I figured that out. And I think now it's still probably part of the ethos, though obviously I haven't checked on it, right? I handed in my Nomad card. I left it in a locker at a train station. And then I wanted, for a couple of days, I didn't even have a name. I didn't know what to be called. I was up at 2:00 in the dining car, and this crazy hot redhead is also there. I was like, what's your name? I'm like, I don't have an answer for you. What would you like to call me? And so I was Redbeard for a couple of days, right on the train. I was just like, I don't actually have an answer to that question. I have lived in an identity soup for so long. I don't even know what it means necessarily. So,
do you think you were on anybody's radar during that time?
Yes.
Did anybody ever get close?
Yes. I got caught a couple of times. No, never for the enormity of what I was doing. But one time when I got caught, somebody tipped their hand and came in and was like, hey, do you know anything about this thing, or this thing? Oh, Colorado, Arizona. I've never been to Arizona. It's too hot in Arizona. And because I had covered my tracks, there was nothing to find. But but I knew there were some people on the tail, right? And occasionally like little cells got busted, but they didn't know shit about me, so it was all self-contained. And somebody would show up to service their customer base because hungry fish need fed. And I would just kind of float around. It's a weird life. It's not for
I would
everybody.
imagine.
I don't recommend it for your own mental health. Like the dissolution of identity is dangerous. Don't do it.
Well, and the sleepless nights that probably come into play. Or you were cool with it?
I don't sleep like humans sleep. I'm a 4-hour sleeper. I don't.
Oh, so that helps.
Yeah, like 4 to 6 hours. I'm a firekeeper. I'm one of the people who is programmed. I don't sleep. I cannot sleep until 2 or 3 a.m. and I wake up with sunrise. Like that is just my programming. 8 hours of sleep, I will feel groggy. I will feel groggy in the same way it feels like if you get 10 or 11 hours. Like, oh, I slept too much. I feel like shit. That's me on an 8-hour sleep.
Well, that's
right?
perfect for this line of work.
Right? Yeah, I get 2 work days. I tell people I get a 9 to 2 and then I get a 9 to 2. And after everybody's asleep, I sure get a lot done.
So one of these times when you're caught, I mean, how severe are we talking? Couple nights in jail or?
Oh, no, it wasn't that. Let's see. So on record, I have been incarcerated in the state of Wyoming for possession with intent to distribute, for time served, which I think was 3 months. And then I had several consecutive 0 to 5 sentences commuted as part of a drug court deal, which the counselors in there was like, people like you were the reason that we shouldn't let lawyers decide who goes into drug court. I'm like, I know, and I'm sorry, I'm taking advantage of this, and I appreciate you just hanging out. But like that's meant for like people on pills and cocaine, like on actual real addictive substances. I was dealing pot. I was not supposed to be in drug court. It was not made for people like me, but did get me out of there in a year instead of probably 10 to 15.
What's the most in terms of quantity that you were caught with?
Oh, less than a pound. Caught with less than a pound. Less than a pound and a dusting of cocaine that wasn't mine. But I took the rap for because that person would have been ruined by that sort of thing. And I was already going down for almost a pound of weed. but it was also packaged. Like it was also individually, like I had a couple ounces and a couple of quarters and a couple of, I had it bagged out. Like it was clearly intent to distribute.
Any close calls where you're transporting something a little heavier?
No, I mean, I drive like a grandma when I'm driving.
That helps.
You break one law at a time. No exceptions. That's the end of list. I mean, there were a couple of times where I had to do some fancy driving in Kansas once. And bouncing from the cops when we were, once upon a time in Denver, there was a club that specifically excluded some friends of a downline that were participating in the industry in order to promote a different category of drugs, which I don't like opiates. And so in order to take action against them, like we came in at night and with a moving truck and just took everything that wasn't nailed down and just cleaned out the whole club. No cash, just all of the furniture and then ransomed it back to them. All of the statutes of limitations are cleared. But that was one where I had there was some heat on that transaction. But never for any of my transport activities. I was also always extra careful. So always unplanned extracurriculars that create heat. And that's just the nature of the game.
Man, what a crazy world to come from. and then to be running political campaigns.
Yeah, I mean, so again, I was into activism and political stuff like at the time. Like,
Yeah, so it fit.
yeah, like when Occupy was available, I was able to travel back and forth and hit a bunch of different Occupies, help sort of connect different movements, and also like learn about different digital activism. That was one thing that Occupy had in spades was digital activism expertise, and various different workshops at different cities like Occupy tenements. It's really interesting. So that was one educational journey I took that helped me understand the digital landscape better. But yeah, I mean the freedom to do whatever you want, really.
It's a good world.
It's weird. Good, bad, these are value judgments.
Life is what you make of it.
It fit me at the time. I wouldn't do it now. But it does, yeah, I mean, it had some political bents to it. I mean, I even worked for candidates a little bit at the time. Because part of my deal, like, I dealt to a lot of rich college kids. A lot of those are cousins or nephews or sons of other rich white guys. So that is part of how I ended up like reintegrating in political campaigns on occasion was, various, I mean, generally it wasn't even directly connected to the candidates. Like a donor would turn me onto a campaign and I would go do volunteer work or light work and, just do something completely anonymously and show up as for a couple of campaigns. I would show up as an anonymous volunteer and just sit on their computer banks and just fix their fucking database. Just like tags, make this useful, because local elections generally don't have that level of technical support, and so kind of like showing up for candidates that I think would be good and pushing them forward. I don't want to the same as I do now, except I use my real name.
Can we pause for a sec? I'm going to have to get out of here in a little bit, but I'm going to take a leak real fast. I know, we're pushing almost 3 again.
3.5 hours again. I could also use a leak.
Perfect.
Well, do we want to wrap up, or do we have more to?
I mean, we could wrap this one up, I guess. I'm going to have to.
Right, 3.5 hours? Do we want?
We're doing time.
We could do a marathon. I got more in me. I just poured more gin.
Do you want to plug where people can find the campaign, where they can get involved if they want to?
AprilForJudge.com.
AprilForJudge.com.
AprilForJudge.com. Actually, let me breathe out the gin for a second. That's the campaign webpage. Definitely vote April Van Dyke on your ballots if you haven't yet. I'm also working still on the anti-parking lot campaign, Arkley's parking lot initiative. I'm working on the campaign to oppose that.
See the last episode.
Right. Check that out. You can go to ILikeEurekaHousing.com or RealHousingForEureka.com. Either one will get you there. And yeah, if you want to know anything about me personally, fuck off. This is as much as you get.
Well, Thomas, this was great, man. I always have a great time.
You too.
Do this.
Absolutely. Good times. Even when we disagree.
All right. Thanks, man.
You too. Bye, everybody.